In the moments when I hear my voice but don't feel like myself, wish I could hold you. It's only you. In the moments when I walk these city streets with someone else, I wish I told you. It's only you. Oh, you. Only you. When the night is over, out of all the places I could choose, I go to you. Only you. Feel you just below the surface, darling. All I wanna do is go to you. Out for a little more of me. Now I can see how much it hurt when I stood still. But I'm learning what it's like to open up a different side. Cause when something hurts this much, I know it's real. Oh, you. Only you. When the night is over, out of all the places I could choose, I go to you. Only you. Feel you just below the surface, darling. All I wanna do is go to you. Holding on until forever doesn't seem to feel so far away. Oh, you, only you. Feel you just below the surface, darling. All I wanna do is go to you.
It's 2 a.m. and cold outside. Is it too late to come? Oh, I can't even sleep at night, cause it's 3 a.m. I'm parked outside. I'm walking to your door, oh, and I can't wait another night, cause 25/7, I give you all my attention, baby, you're my obsession. 25/7, I give you love and affection, baby, you're my obsession. It's 4 a.m. I'm by your side. Our clothes are on the floor. Oh, don't wanna say goodbye. No, I want more. 25/7. I give you all my attention, baby, you're my obsession. 25/7. I give you love and affection, baby, you're my obsession. 25, 25, 7. You gotta know, no, no, no. Baby, you're my obsession. At the very start, hands on each other, couldn't stand to be far apart. Closer the better. Now we're picking fights and slamming doors, magnifying all our flaws. And I wonder why, wonder what for, why we keep coming back for more. Is it just our bodies? Are we both losing our minds? Is the only reason you're holding me tonight 'cause we're scared to be lonely? Do we need somebody just to feel like we're alright? Is the only reason you're holding me tonight 'cause we're scared to be lonely? Too much time losing track of us. Where was the real? Undefined, spiraling out of touch. Forgot how it feels. All the messed up fights and slamming doors, magnifying all our flaws. And I wonder why, wonder what for. It's like we keep coming back for more. Is it just our bodies? Are we both losing our minds? Is the only reason you're holding me tonight 'cause we're scared to be lonely? Do we need somebody just to feel like we're alright? Is the only reason you're holding me tonight 'cause we're scared to be lonely? Scared to be lonely. Even when we know it's wrong, been somebody better for us all along. Tell me, how can we keep holding on tonight? 'Cause we're scared to be lonely, even when we know it's wrong.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Midwest Economic Outlook Summit will begin in 10 minutes.
Holding on tonight 'cause we're scared to be lonely. Is it just our bodies? Are we both losing our minds? Is the only reason you're holding me tonight 'cause we're scared to be lonely? Think about it. There must be a higher love down in the heart or hidden in the stars above. Without it, life is a wasted time. Look inside your heart and I look inside mine. Things look so bad everywhere in this whole world. What is fair?
You know when I come back, you know what it look like.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Midwest Economic Outlook Summit will begin in 5 minutes. Please take your seats. Once again, the Midwest Economic Outlook Summit will begin in 5 minutes. Thank you.
So I put it in this song. They tell me think with my head, not that thing in my chest. They got their hands at my neck this time. But you're the one that I want. If that's really so wrong, then they don't know what this feeling is like. And I see, yeah, 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 yeah,
I'll tell them a story, they'll sit and nod their heads. I'll tell you all my secrets, and you tell all your friends. Hold on to your opinions, and stand by what you said. In the end it's my decision, so it's my fault when it ends.
They tell me think with my head, not that thing in my chest. They got their hands at my neck this time. But you're the one that I want. If that's really so wrong, then they don't know what this feeling is like. I'll tell you a story before it tells itself. I lay out all my reasons. You'll say that I need help. We all got expectations, and sometimes they go wrong. But no one listens to me, so I put it in this song. They tell me think with my head, not that thing in my chest. They got their hands at my neck this time. But you're the one that I want. If that's really so wrong, then they don't know what this feeling is like. My friends say no, no, they don't know, no, they don't know, no. When the night is young, daylight shines on an undisclosed location. Bloodshot eyes looking for the sun. Paradise delivered and we call it a vacation. You're painting me the dream that I wanna belong in. Over the hills and far away, a million miles from LA, just anywhere away with you. I know we've got to get away, someplace where no one knows our name. We'll find the start to something new. Just take me anywhere, take me anywhere, anywhere away with you. Just take me anywhere, take me anywhere.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Midwest Economic Outlook Summit will begin in 1 minute. Please take your seats. Once again, the Midwest Economic Outlook Summit will begin in 1 minute. Thank you.
Truth comes out when we're blacking out, looking for connection in a crowd of empty faces. Your secret's still the only thing I'm craving now. The good and the bad in the end, 'cause I can take it.
We're here for you.
West Fargo Chamber of Commerce today announced its plans for expanding on the Metro's workforce and economy with a nearly $10 million federal grant.
And we'll be your partner every step of the way. We are passionate about opening doors for you, and we want to see your business succeed.
Had an incredible morning, obviously talking about energy, grid reliability.
Absolutely great event that the Fargo-Moorhead West Fargo Chamber puts on every year.
I believe that together we can make real change, and we can create a climate that we all want to live and do business.
I feel our partnerships with the business community makes the future limitless for our region.
Together, we are redefining our story. We are so excited to work alongside you in continued partnership with the type of investment that has been the foundation of this community and will be the future of our success.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the President and CEO of the Fargo-Moorhead West Fargo Chamber of Commerce, Shannon Full.
Good morning, everyone. Wow, bring on the coffee. Good morning, everyone. We're really excited to have you here today. We've got a jam-packed agenda for you today, so thanks for joining us regarding the conversation on the economy here in the Midwest. The Midwest Summits are a series that the Fargo-Moorhead West Fargo Chamber of Commerce is proud to champion. These summits are an impactful way that we can combine our efforts to generate ideas and convene our industry experts to discuss challenges and create solutions. There is strength in knowledge, there is strength in collaboration, and most importantly, we see tremendous strength here in the Midwest. We are very excited to have a variety of economic perspectives at the table today from various industries, and proud of all of our partners for coming together to discuss the future of the economy. But of course, the event is only possible because of our fabulous sponsors. So our premier sponsors today, longtime sponsors and supporters of the Chamber, Bremer Bank and Cass County Electric. Our gold sponsor today is Sanford Health Plan. We have got tremendous media sponsors that are on site here covering the event, allowing us to get even more traction behind it. Inforum, KFGO, and MWC Advertising. Silver sponsors include Alaris, Dakota Bank, Dakota Carrier Network, Delta Hotels, First International Bank and Trust, First Western Bank and Trust, Gate City Bank, Marvin, Minnesota State University Moorhead, North Dakota State College of Science, Prairie Business, Pro Resources, Sanford Health, Starion Bank, and Wells Fargo. Our corporate sponsors are being shown on the screen right now. We have numerous of them, and we so appreciate each and every one of our sponsors. And finally, our event production sponsor is Livewire. They do a tremendous job helping us bring you these high-quality events. And finally, our event photography sponsor, 5'20" Design Lounge, who's been at all of our events, and we just love Dennis, so thank you for that. In addition to the summit, we are collaborating once again. This is a piece that makes us very unique. The Midwest Summits are Midwest in nature because of our partnering co-hosting chambers. From across the Midwest, who are now being shown on the screen, 25 chambers joined us for this event and are streaming this into their own communities. Yeah, thanks. As someone who's been in this industry for 21 years, it's a fabulous opportunity when you can partner with other chambers. We hear from many of them that they may be smaller in size, don't have the ability to attract the quality of speakers that we do. So to give them access is very much appreciated, but it's really impactful. It just allows these speakers to have an even greater impact in those local communities as well. As always, the audience is encouraged to engage with us today. Hence why if you need to drink more coffee, because we would like you to use the QR codes that are found at your table. This is not difficult. We do this now with all of our events. It actually streamlines this. You simply take a picture of the QR code. It'll bring you directly to the question page where you can submit your questions. Our panelists are very excited to hear your questions, so please engage with us. I would now like to welcome to the stage one of our premier sponsors for today's program, Cass County Electric. Please help me welcome to the stage Chief Financial Officer and Vice President of Corporate Services with Cass County Electric, Chad Sapa.
Thank you, Shannon. Good morning, everybody. Cass County Electric is proud to be one of the premier sponsors this morning for the Midwest Economic Outlook Summit, along with Bremer Bank. Cass County Electric is local and a member-owned electric supplier for significant portions of Fargo, West Fargo, and in parts of 10 counties in southeast North Dakota. And I'm pretty sure well over half of you today here are Cass County Electric members. So a special welcome to all of you. As a cooperative, we're owned by those we serve and operate on a non-for-profit basis. We take pride in the service we provide for our members, and at the end of each fiscal year, our profits, or in our industry, we call them margins. The margins are allocated back to each member owner and eventually paid back. For instance, last week we had a board meeting and our board of directors approved a record $4.5 million to be paid back in return of capital to our owners at Cass County Electric, so kind of a big deal for us. Over the past year, high inflation and unprecedented interest rate hikes by the Federal Reserve has many of us feeling financial stress. Fortunately, I'm really happy to say today that Cass County Electric has maintained flat electric rates through this period. In fact, over the past 5 years, our electric rates have remained flat. And looking forward, we do not anticipate any changes in electric rates anytime soon. So we purchase our electricity from Minn Kota Power Cooperative, and together we support an all of the above energy strategy from North Dakota's energy resources to ensure reliable and affordable electricity for our members. The Fargo-Moorhead West Fargo Chamber has planned an excellent program this morning, and I have the privilege to get things started by introducing our first keynote speaker, Dr. Doug Duncan. Try saying that fast 3 times. Dr. Duncan is a Senior Vice President and Chief Economist at Fannie Mae, where he's responsible for forecasting and analysis of the economy and the housing and mortgage markets. Dr. Duncan also oversees strategic research regarding the potential impact of external factors on the housing industry. Under his leadership, Fannie Mae's Economic and Strategic Research Group has won the National Association for Business Economics Outlook Award, which is presented annually for the most accurate GDP and Treasury note yields forecasts. This was in both 2015 and 2016. He is the first recipient in the award's history to capture this honor 2 years in a row. In addition, his team was awarded the Pulsenomics for Best Home Price Forecasting, named one of Bloomberg's Business Week's 50 most powerful people in real estate, and Inman News 100 most influential people in real estate. Dr. Duncan is Fannie Mae's source for analysis on demographics and the external business and economic environment, the implications of changes in economic activity on the company's strategy and execution, and for forecasting overall housing, economic, and mortgage activity. So please help me welcome Dr. Doug Duncan.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks to the Chambers for the invitation to come back home. Grew up on a dairy farm in Fergus Falls, Minnesota, and went to NDSU. So it is home, and I appreciate coming back where it doesn't involve the business end of a Holstein. Now the family, when I come home and speak, the family is always concerned about its reputation. So my niece Heidi Schultz is here this morning, keeping record to protect the reputation of the family. So, but it's great to be back here. I know the Chamber is very involved in the business community here, and a big support for the business community. You don't always hear that all around the country at different places, but I would say that is a hallmark of the folks here, is the engagement. So thanks for the invitation to come. I think there's a timer here. Plus, I drank a lot of coffee, so I'm relying on natural forces to bring this to a close. And so we'll talk a little bit about the economy. Make sure that shows up. That just basically says Fannie Mae will deny I was ever here. So each year in January, we spend some time as a staff trying to think about what would be the underlying theme for the year. Not that there's any magic about one year, but it's actually a kind of a check on ourselves as we think about the various impulses under economic activity. Can we capture in a brief statement the essence of how the year will play out? And so over the years that we've done this, it's actually been a very good tool for us to judge ourselves against. Interestingly, the longest number of words, or the most number of words that you can use that people will remember, is 7. So this year we have 4 words. It's awaiting improvements in affordability. And it's not just about housing, but it's the rise in interest rates that was mentioned has affected affordability in lots of places across the economy. And so we think that is going to be a dominant theme across the course of this year. So you'll see. Now, I have a deal with the people on the website that if things don't work out, they eliminate that later in the year. So I wanted to start with a little bit of the conversation that some of us had at the reception last night, which was about the word normal. And is it appropriate to use the word normal? And truth is, I don't think it is. I think there's the disruption of the pandemic, which was such that there will be reverberations from that for some time. And certainly the Fed is dealing with some of the after effects of the policy changes that took place to offset some of the effects of the pandemic. But I thought I would give you this look at what happened to overall economic growth, just because it highlights the dramatic impact that the pandemic had on economic activity. So each one of these little bars is that quarter's growth rate annualized. So if that happened for the full year, that's what it would have been. So what you see to the left of the 2 dramatic bars in the middle, that's the longer term pace at which economic activity was taking place. Then you see the first bar that goes negative. That was actually March of 2020, because January and February were positive growth, but the magnitude of the downturn in March was such that for the whole quarter, economic growth actually fell. And then you see the next quarter, the dramatic decline. But then you also see the dramatic recovery. And following that, you see the pulse of policy that was put in place to counteract the effects of the pandemic. And you see they are substantially greater than growth prior to the pandemic. And to some degree, I asked Ron if he wanted me to say anything to set up the Fed comments. He said, tell people the Fed is doing a great job. Well, they have a very difficult job, and I think they're doing as well as humans can be expected to do, given the absence of omniscience. So I don't believe the Fed is omniscient. I don't think they are either. But that pulse of policy is still working its way through the system. You can see there, however, we have had in our forecast since last April a mild recession starting in the first half of 2023. So I'll unpack that a little bit. Could it be a soft landing? Yes, it certainly could be a soft landing. The probabilities of that have picked up a little bit recently. I'll talk about that some. So that's the cliff notes. So if you want to go back to your coffee, that'll be the first half. And then I'll talk a little bit about housing for the second half. So what are some of the data that underlie that? One of the things that you see is a divergence between the very interest rate sensitive sectors like housing and manufacturing. Both of those are really in recession at this point from our perspective. And the services side, which is actually the bulk of employment in the economy, which is still doing pretty well. So there are conflicting data. You saw the very strong labor report last Friday. You also would recognize that the leading economic indicators index has been negative for multiple months, and that usually is a very good predictor, as is an inverted U curve, which is very negative and has been for quite some time. Also a very good predictor of recession. So there's a conflict in the data. And it's a very difficult task for the Fed to sort out the direction that things will go, given that their tools operate with a lag. And so it's uncertain. The Labor Department report suggested we've added over 500,000 jobs in December. There was no one that was suggesting anything close to that. I think the highest forecast estimate I saw was about 300,000 jobs. So huge change. So lots of discussion among economists. They're taking off the elbow patches. Things are getting rough about how do we interpret that data. And there's a whole discussion about normal. Are the seasonal adjustment factors normal? Are they, should they be adjusted in some way for behaviors subsequent to the pandemic? Unknown. Clearly, on the inflation front, there are some indicators that, particularly the headlines, which are coming down. You've seen energy prices come down, so their contribution to headline inflation has come down. Agriculture, important, obviously, in North Dakota. Food came down for a while and has sort of leveled off at a higher than comfortable level. Things like eggs with the avian flu. Egg prices way up, some multiple other things that are kind of basic to households. Excuse me. Some of the supply chain pressures have eased, but they're not back to where they were. So the Fed, at the outset of the significant rise of inflation, used the term transitory. Now, I keep the Oxford English Dictionary next to my computer. I assume the rest of you do as well. So I looked up the word transitory, and it said not permanent. I was like, well, I can't really argue. Life itself is transitory. So we divided that word into two pieces. One is bottlenecks that occurred as a result of human interaction in the presence of a very serious disease that could impact people's lives. How do you adjust for those kinds of things? And one poster child for that was all the ships lined up outside of the Long Beach harbor, suggesting difficulty in offloading materials, imports, and things like that. We would put that in the transitory camp as people understood how to interrelate in the post-pandemic period. The other thing, though, is geopolitics was dictating that there would be some restructuring of supply chains. From our perspective, that's longer term and more expensive and will add to the underlying inflationary pressures in economic activity. So we kind of subdivided that, and I think the transitory portion is actually working out. The headline data are coming down. The Fed's not done yet, but there's some progress on that front. But the other piece will play out over time. The other thing that we think is not transitory and will also add to the underlying inflationary impulses over the longer term is decarbonization. So as we proceed along that pace, that also will be time-consuming and expensive. So a couple of things that the Fed is leaning against. Now, the goods portion of inflation coming down, that yellow is the services portion, which is what the Chair Powell, has been speaking about. Part of that is housing, and I'll talk about housing in a couple of minutes. But the rest really gets captured in what's going on in the Labor Department or in the employment area, and that's why the employment report last week was such an impactful issue, is because it suggests that there is not there's a little bit of evidence, but not broad-based evidence of what the Fed is calling easing in the employment space, which frankly means a rise in unemployment. We do see in this mild recession a rise in unemployment, partly because new entrants won't find jobs, so that pushes the unemployment rate up a bit, and partly because of job losses. You've seen some of that in the technology field. We expect that you'll see some additional changes there. There are, the staff told me, don't embarrass us. We've done good work, so I just have to remember which ones I had them put in here. So the housing portion, the chairman has appropriately said we'll start to see some easing in the second half of this year. Now the rental piece, housing is reflected through rents, and rents renew or leases renew on an annual basis. So in the second half of this year, we would expect the housing component of the services to start to recede as well. However, our view of why the recession will be mild is in part because we haven't solved the supply problem in housing. And you've actually seen a little bit of evidence of that. Mortgage rates ran up to 7%. They're down now around 6.1%. Just that drop has led to a little tick up in activity. Housing's not out of the recession yet, but it suggests that there are people on the margin who are ready to act at those higher interest rates because they still have cash that they accumulated over the course of the stimulus packages related to the pandemic. And even that modest decline in interest rates led to a little bit of a pickup in activity. Part of the reason is, and this is, I'll give you part of the cliff notes of the housing comments here. One is the boomers are doing what they've always said they were going to do, which is age in place. They are absolutely staying in their homes. Now, no one ever talks about Gen X, so I'm giving them a little airtime. The Gen Xers are the ones that locked in 2.5% to 4% mortgages. They're going nowhere. So now you've got all these people who own existing homes with no incentive to go anywhere. It leaves the housing sector supply problem to be solved by builders. So I'll come back to that in a couple of moments. So one of the things that you don't hear much talk about is monetary aggregates. And by that, the measures of cash, I guess, is a shorthand way of saying it. And the M2, which is the one that monetary economists watch, has been plummeting. So it is suggesting that there's the potential for a recession coming from the monetary side of the equation. But then the other chart that I've shown here is how much saving was available to consumers through the course of the stimulus packages as a result of the attempts to stem the costs of the pandemic. Huge amounts of transfers, but that red part on that chart suggests that particularly for low and moderate income households, they've exhausted those funds. And they're now, and you see credit card receivables and things like that starting to pick up as they've had to curtail their spending because of the exhaustion of those reserves. So one of the questions is, what do they expect in terms of incomes? This is some data taken from the Conference Board. The Conference Board's been doing this survey for, 50 or 60 years. So they ask people in the survey, 6 months ahead, do you expect your income to be higher, the same, or lower than today? About 70 to 74% of people, irrespective of anything that's going on in the economy, say the same. So we subtract that. And then we subtract those that think it will be lower from those that think it will be higher, just to get a view of the marginal household. What do they expect in terms of income? What you see here is they expect their income to remain stable, so not growth-oriented. So as we think about, is it likely that consumption would pick up to support a soft landing or not? It sort of suggests that somewhere between the mild recession that we're thinking about or a soft landing is a pretty reasonable place to be from the consumer's perspective. When I say mild recession, a 0.6% decline in GDP growth from year over year, so pretty mild, and unemployment running up to maybe 5.4, 5.5. Economists put decimal points in their forecast to demonstrate their sense of humor. Now, one of the things that the Fed is watching and which Chair Powell has made comments on is the expectation of a tightening of financial conditions being one of the pieces of evidence of a decline, sustainable decline in inflation. What you can see is recently, I gave you that little preview of the pickup in mortgage land because of that decline in headline mortgage rates. Broadly, financial conditions have eased recently. The question is, how does the Fed board think about that when they're thinking about monetary tightening or monetary ease? Well, Chair Powell had an interview yesterday at the Economics Club in Washington, D.C., and there wasn't really an answer to how comfortable he was with that easing of financial conditions that we've seen in the most recent months. More to be said on that front. This chart shows the red arrows are instances where the Fed started tightening monetary policy reactively. In other words, there was a pickup in inflation. They responded after the fact. In each of those instances, we had a recession. The green arrows are where the Fed tightened preemptively. In each of those instances, we got a soft landing. So in this instance, they tightened reactively. But as I said, the data are really conflicted. And it goes back to that conversation that we had last night at the reception about what constitutes normal. I was in New York last week. I go up to New York the third week of January every year and spend time with a whole bunch of different media outlets. One of the Bloomberg radio people that I'm on his program from time to time, he has about 20 million listeners. He looked at me and said, "Does anybody understand this economy?" And this is somebody that's widely respected in the business news space. So there's lots of uncertainty about where things lie. So one of the things that the Fed is doing is it's running off its portfolio. It's the single biggest holder of mortgage-backed securities in the world. And those Gen Xers who locked in those 2.5% to 4% mortgages are going nowhere. So the Fed's portfolio is running off much slower than I think they would like. Their objective in the MBS portfolio is not to hold any in the future. That will take a while at current interest rates. So one of the things you're hearing a discussion of is the debt ceiling. That is going to be a contentious issue. But I wanted to make the point, both parties are playing in this game. What this is showing in that bottom line is we've had 2 Republican presidents and 2 Democrat presidents over the last couple of decades, and across all of those administrations, we have been dissaving or running deficits and increasing the outstanding debt. So both parties have a hand in this. There'll be lots of debate about what to do about it. Ultimately, we think the ceiling will be raised. There'll be some sort of negotiation, and there'll be an agreement. Because what will happen in the event of a failure to raise the ceiling will be more volatility and turmoil in financial markets. Just the downgrade that happened the last time that this became a really big issue, showed a big increase in spreads in financial markets. So I think they will want to ultimately avoid that, but it will be something to watch. So I gave you the headline. We expect a mild recession 2023 and recovery in 2024, about 2% growth. Housing will lead that recovery out as interest rates come down and activate the supply side of housing. So we're at the end of 40 or more years of disinflation of the U.S. economy. So all across that time frame, people have had these periodic opportunities to refinance their mortgage credit related to their housing. That pretty much came to an end earlier this year. So the question is, what do things look like going forward? If I had to bet my next year's salary on some underlying theme for the next decade, and by the way, don't tell my boss that I said that. If we're going into a cost-cutting phase, that might cost me. I would anticipate that mortgage rates will run between 4.5% and 6% for a decade. The higher level when growth is stronger, the lower level when we have a cyclical downturn, and there'll probably be one sometime in that decade. But that's why I say those 2.5% to 4% mortgages, they're probably not going to go anywhere anytime soon because we are going to be, I think, in a higher rate environment. Right now, in housing, we have, according to our theme, awaiting improvement in affordability. Affordability in housing is the poorest it's been since, let's see, what's the date on there? Since November of 2005. So almost 20 years, this is the least affordable housing environment. So consequently, it shouldn't be any surprise that housing is in a recession. This is my favorite chart to explain why we have a supply problem. And I saw one of your sponsors is Eide Bailly. I gave a presentation for Eide Bailly, and I said this was my favorite chart. And 2 years ago, and I was threatening my staff I was going to put it on a T-shirt. And Cheryl Knudsen of Eide Bailly made a bunch of T-shirts with that chart on it and sent it. So now the staff actually have these T-shirts. Thank you, Cheryl. And just to Cheryl's bosses, this is the advertising payback for the T-shirts for the cost that she incurred. That significant decline, 2007 to 2009, the collapse of housing, led to 3.5 years at which we produced about 400,000 houses per year, from a peak of 2.2 million. So we destroyed almost 80% of the supply chain in the time frame when the millennials were growing up to start to be buying homes. So it takes a long time to build a supply chain. So the orange line you see on the right-hand side, the lower right-hand side of that chart, that's the builders trying to rebuild the supply chain. The dark line is the year-over-year change in real house price. And if you believe in markets, price increases are a signal to entrepreneurs to come into production. So that dramatic rise in the house price is signaling we need supply. And the builders are working as hard as they can to increase production of housing. But you had to bring back all the people that left that labor market, all the input suppliers that shut down places that built things like PVC pipe and fixtures for sinks and all that kind of stuff. So very strong signal demographically as the millennials move to become the demand curve. You see that response in price related to a very difficult process of rebuilding the supply chain for houses. Then you see the pandemic, 21 and 22, the skyrocketing of house prices, which is being adjusted, which is part of the Fed's problem today, is to bring back housing back so that home costs come back into line with incomes. That's the process that's underway today. Does that make sense? It should sort of resonate with, if you believe in markets and supply and demand. This is my favorite chart this year, so I haven't called Cheryl to see if I can get a t-shirt for this. But what I only have about 5 minutes left, so I'll do this and then jump to the what we see in the forecast. So I call this the barbed wire chart because I grew up on that dairy farm, and I don't really have a lot of affection for barbed wire, but this is kind of how it behaves. What's this chart trying to say? On the vertical axis, what it says is there's a relationship between the income of a household and the price it can pay for a house. And the rule of thumb is kind of like 3 times your income is kind of a price. But the horizontal chart recognizes that if you have to borrow money to buy that house, if interest rates are higher, then the price you can afford has to be a little bit lower. If interest rates are lower, you can pay a little bit more. So that's all this chart is doing. So from the early 1980s all the way out to about 2002 or 2003, that ratio was right on line as what you would predict. Then we saw the credit conditions easing in the 2004, 5, 6, 7 time period, and you saw that's what that loop is the relationship between household incomes and the price they could pay for houses got way out of whack. Then you see it drop below that line. That was the crisis, the mortgage crisis, where prices had to get realigned to that relationship between household incomes and house prices adjusted for mortgage rates. Then it was back on track out until the pandemic, and then it blew up again. So the question is, how do we get from that very dislocated space back to that long-term relationship? Well, there's really only about 3 things that can happen. One is incomes can grow. That's part of the Fed's problem, is how do we manage real income growth while getting inflation down? Second one is that house prices can come down, and they are to some degree, not dramatically. And the other one is we can increase supply, which when monetary conditions tighten, builders slow production. So it's actually aggravating the supply problem. So we're not solving the supply problem. We are still seeing some income growth. If we get inflation down, rates will come back down. That will advantage things. But the housing sector is likely to lead the economy out of, be one of the factors that will lead the economy out of this brief recession. So the rest of these slides can be made available to all of you if you're having difficulty with sleeping. The rest of it is just data that underlies that story, which says 2023 will be a year of recession in housing. But the fact that we haven't repealed the supply problem, when the Fed gets inflation under control and rates come back down, housing will lead on the way out for economic activity. Let me see if there's any other items that I want to touch. One last thing, just the magnitude of the lock-in effect of the Gen Xers. So that spike on the far right-hand side of the chart. Today, 90% of households with a mortgage have a mortgage that's more than 100 basis point or a full percentage point below current interest rates. 72% of all people with a mortgage have an interest rate that's 2% or more below current market rates. So when we talk about a lock-in effect, that's what we're talking about. It's to refinance, you'd have to go even a full percentage point below current market rates and capture those differences to actually see a pickup in refinancing in any significant way or turnover. So that's the challenge, in addition to the boomers aging in place. And I saw a couple of boomers here. I personally know nothing of that age group. And Heidi is not allowed to contradict that. So here's our outlook. Recession for housing in 2023, leading the way out into recovery, about 2% growth for the economy in 2024. We think the Fed is going to do 3 more rate increases of 1/4 point each and then hold. We're taking Chair Powell's statements at face value that in order to ensure that inflation gets back to their targets, they're going to hold for some time. So that's kind of the cliff notes of our view. And I think I finished on time. I have 21 seconds if there's an absolutely must-answer question. If not, thank you for your patience. Great to be with you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Vice President of Communications and Public Affairs at Primacy Strategy Group, Kurt Zellers.
All right, well, hopefully useful.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out this morning. I have to say, after Dr. Duncan's presentation, I'm feeling a little transitory myself. The fact that he nailed my mortgage almost down to the percentage, and then I'm getting worried my daughter, who's a senior in high school in 10 years when she's going to buy a house. I mean, it was a little bit, a little on edge because he was pretty close to the mark on that. We've got a great panel, so I'm going to get right into it because you don't need to hear a recap. You need to hear what these folks have to say, and a lot of the comments from Dr. Duncan are going to go right into that. So please help me welcome the first panel. It includes a great cast of commentators. Darren Peterson is the president for Marvin. Come on up, Darren. We have Camille Grande, the Chief Marketing Officer for Bushel. Thank you very much. And then Randy Martinson is the founder of Martinson Ag Risk Management. Welcome up, Randy. So we're going to have quite a few questions, but first of all, this, just as Dr. Duncan said, this is interactive. So we want you to make sure and add your questions. There's a QRS code. That's that little weird-looking box for those of you who have not used them before. You put your phone on there, and it'll literally take you right to that. Or you can go to www.chamberquestions.com and submit your questions there. But please do. We want this to be as interactive as possible. In 45 minutes or less, we're going to get to every topic possible and then your questions. So the first one actually gets us kind of right back into where we were. The impact, the expected impact of the recent interest rates from the Fed on consumer borrowing and spending, as well as the overall impact growth in the short term and long term. What are each of you seeing in your business areas? What effect has that had both in the short term and then as you're planning out for 2023? What do you see? Well, we'll start right here, Randy.
Well, one of the things that we're seeing, of course, is with the interest rates increasing, it's putting a little bit more strain on producers to borrow money for operating notes. We've been in an environment where we've seen very low interest rates, and interest hasn't been much of an impact on cost of production. Now all of a sudden, it's becoming a little bit more of a cost, and we have to pay more attention to being able to move grain timely to be able to, well, one, meet the extra interest rate costs as well as the increase in costs of the other inputs.
And Camille, especially, looking, again, forecasting out, do you see that impact? Is it easier to manage as we've kind of adjusted to the new not normal? As Dr. Duncan said, does anybody understand this economy? How has that adjustment been for you short term? And then do you have a plan in place kind of as how to handle this going forward to 2023?
Yeah, I think within the technology industry, there's been a lot of capital infusion that's come into, tech startups and high growth companies over the last several years because it was really efficient to deploy capital to fund these types of organizations. And what we're seeing is there is a stronger push to get to a quicker path to profitability, right? A lot of these early stage companies are taking outside capital to get to fast growth so that they can get to a positive EBITDA or they can get to a positive profitability line. And it's going to become harder to access that capital to build that growth within companies. And then there is more pressure on early stage companies to produce that positive EBITDA or get to that line of profitability as well.
And Darren, I saved you for last because after Dr. Duncan's presentation, no pressure, but that pie chart there, you might have a t-shirt you take back home to say to your bosses, right, we need to hire more people. Look at this chart. From Marvin's standpoint, how does that look? And are you starting to see kind of that? I mean, obviously the demand is there, but I thought he really nailed it when talking about bringing people back in the workforce. If there's one thing that Shannon and the Chamber have done an excellent job of highlighting is that workforce challenge we have up here.
Yeah, maybe I need to, I want to peel back a little bit to the start of the pandemic. And March 2020, never forget. And March 16th, we grounded our plane. 23rd, we sent out home. I got a bad mic here. We sent our people to work from home, and our orders fell 30% in April. They fell 15% in May. They fell again in June, and we didn't know how this thing was going to play out. And we come back from the 4th of July, and the corner it turned. And the demand started to come, and our teams literally housing, our order file has been on fire. And our teams have just been running relentlessly for the last 2.5 years, and we still have high backlogs in our plants. We're still working through them. There is a housing problem, as Dr. Duncan described. There just is not enough stock in the country. We see things slowing a little, especially in that move-up market, but our premium market, our high-end market where there's cash, tremendous activity yet, and we're planning for a flat year, but coming off significant growth the last 2 years. It's been unbelievable.
And so this is your opportunity to say, and if you'd like to, marvin.com/workforce, put it in a pitch for anybody who'd like to get a job for the summer. Just to finish on that one, so how does, us up here in the upper Midwest, Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, how do we compare to some of the other regions in the country that you supply to? Are we above, are we below, are we on pace? How do we compare here versus some of those other housing markets you're all supplying to?
Yeah, so in terms of, is it getting employees, Kurt, you were asking? Or
that as well as the demand, like where are you pushing, where are you seeing that growth or that?
Well, let me address the employees first. It has been more challenging for us. We have factories from Florida to Baker, Oregon. Yeah. And it has been more challenging for us in the Midwest to find employees. In some of our markets, there's one applicant for every one job available, so it's been a real challenge. So we have had to be extremely creative. We've had a tremendous amount of luck here in Fargo. Fargo has, I said it to Mayor Dardis and Mayor Mahoney this morning, they've saved our bacon. We moved product lines here to Fargo this year. We've hired hundreds of people, and Fargo we've been able to meet the workforce challenge here, but our teams have worked extremely hard to do that. In our southern plants, it hasn't been as hard to hire workforce. We've actually brought temporary workers from Georgia, Texas, to Fargo, and to Warroad, Minnesota, and to Grafton, just to fill the needs, bringing temporary workers in for the first time in company history because we have had difficulty hiring.
Wow. Well, and the natural inclination is to blame the weather people, right? I mean, if they wouldn't keep reporting on our wonderful weather up here, it would be easier to draw people. So I want to go into some of the foreign influence, because that's another big part of this, especially on the ag side, Randy. No surprise here. Our family farm is a Century Act farm. We were a Homestead Act, been up near Candu for 100-some years. That foreign need and demand from our farmers here, and then to get it there, has been what supplied, our families and our farms up here for generations. How is that demand? How have, now that new NAFTA is in place, how is that demand and how is that the back and forth? Is it leveled? Is it improving? Do you see us doing better, worse? And then you throw in the whole, Russian invasion and how that's affected the market. And you've got 30 seconds or less. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, yeah. Oh, wow.
No,
well, you look at it, and you're right. I mean, demand is one of the big things that drives our ag economy, and world demand is part of it. When you look at wheat is an export-dependent market, which means we need to export half of what we produce in the U.S. We can't consume it domestically. Same with soybeans. Soybeans, as of now, are an export-dependent market. We need to export half of what we produce. Corn isn't so much. So that really leads us to depend on other countries to buy our product. Wheat, it's been tough because there's a wheat crop harvested every month someplace in the world.
Yeah.
So it's tough to sell wheat into the world market. You throw in soybeans, you got China. I mean, there's just no question about it. They buy 2/3 of the beans sold in the world. I mean, anybody producing beans, 2/3 go into China. So that's been the biggest market. Now we're seeing, as of late, some issue with Mexico with corn. They import 25% of what we export on corn, about 500 million bushels, and now they don't want to import GMO corn. So that's starting to cause a little problem, and thinking that we could see our corn exports drop. But really what it's coming down to is that, we're a big player in some of these markets, but we're starting to lose a little bit of that because of the increase in production in Brazil. So now we're becoming a second supplier for soybeans, a second supplier for corn. So we need to depend more domestic demand. And that's one of the things that these crush plants that are being talked about, I think there's like 28 of them on the board right now to be built to use our soybeans, which is important to us. North Dakota exports 70% of the beans we produce. Mm-hmm. Well, with these crush plants that are being built, we're now only going to export 25%. That means that we're going to have a more stable market, a little more stable pricing opportunities for farmers.
And how do you see so focusing on soybeans, that protein factor? Now, people wanting more protein, not necessarily just as a part of a component part of a mix, soy oil or whatever. How do you see that improving? Do these crushing plants help that protein production as more people want the proteins, not just necessarily the soybeans?
It does, because as you crush soybeans, of course you have two components. You have soybean oil, you have soybean meal. Soybean meal is used to feed animals. That's in the animal agriculture. So that's going to help improve the availability of one of the major feedstuffs for feeding livestock. Now, up here in the Northern Plains, we have a little bit difficulty with feeding animals because of you mentioned, our climate. Workforce is another. So that's some of the concerns that of being able to use the demand or use the extra soybean meal. But now all of a sudden that'll enter the export market, and we do have, countries that will buy soybean meal from us.
Right. So Camille, it sounds like in agriculture, if we're, if it's not as easy as it used to be, we got great products, we just send it everywhere else. Technology is the way to help our farmers, to help our producers. I should use the word producer, but my family said we're farmers. What's a producer? The technology part of it, whether it's accessing markets, whether it's increasing productivity, how do you see that playing as these new markets, or as we bring things back to the stateside for production? How do you see technology augmenting that?
Yeah, so, my company, Bushel, we sit at that intersection of agriculture and technology. We built a platform with a really simple premise that our belief window was that farmers didn't have easy access to their account information with their grain cooperatives or ag retailers to see their information. So for example, to see a scale ticket from a grain delivery, it was you got your paper ticket and you better collect them on a clip on your dashboard in your truck or in a coffee can in there, and then tally them up at the end of the day. So it was solving this really kind of first principle problem of just give the producer access to information. And that really is what's happening in the technology landscape with our producers. Now, you can overwhelm, right, with all the information, but you can actually help educate, influence, and drive to better decision making by having the right information at the right time in an aggregated and automated fashion. And so getting that easy access to our farmers, my dad and brother farm north of here, and the amount of times I've heard them shuffle around papers or try and figure out what's going on with how much they have left to deliver at their local grain elevator is frustrating. And sometimes it feels like technology works so far ahead. There's a company based in the southern part of the U.S. that's working on creating blockchain for grain contracts. And I think that work should be done, right? There's value in that, but I think we're a little ways out from that. I think step one is maybe we should just give access to it first so they can see it before getting a verified chain of command and authorization for the contract. Let's back up a little bit. I don't know that it's well understood within agriculture how difficult it is for our farmers to access their account information and the information that's needed to drive business decisions and to improve profitability on farm.
So maybe we should bring Dr. Duncan back up here. So what I'm hearing is the folks like, my relatives that are, the technology's not so hot, all the millennials that don't have anywhere to live, we'll bring them back to the farm. They can teach the farmers how to access the technology and we'll be that much more productive. Everybody wins, right?
It'd solve a lot of problems.
Yeah, and apparently I'm still not going anywhere because I have a 3.8% mortgage, so I'm going to stay right where I'm at. So Darren, so this leads into the supply chain. You talked about the pandemic, and I think a lot of us were shocked to find out that the ibuprofen that we buy in a jug this big at Sam's Club or Costco, 98% of it is made in China. It's just about everything else. So how is that supply chain, now that you've had that, I wish I had one of the cool charts of Dr. Duncan, it went, oh my God, ugly up here to maybe, coming back in line. How do you see that, and how does some of the egg wars, the commodity wars, affect your guys' ability to supply? Because I know it's always a trade-off, right? Well, if you don't give us enough soybeans, we're not going to give you the glass or the batteries that we need. How have you adjusted, and how is it come back online? Can you give us some hope?
Yeah, as Dr. Duncan mentioned, there was a lot of supply that was constricted during the last housing recession, and it had been brought back at, I would say, the pace it didn't need to come back at. So they were running just in time, hand to mouth in many cases. And when the housing demand really took off, we ramped up capacity and we found tremendous issues with our supply chain. It slowed us down. It slowed down every window and door manufacturer, and it slowed down housing in general because there just wasn't enough supply chain. Many of our suppliers run about 12 months behind us in terms of ramping up capacity. They've now caught up. Supply really hurt us last year. Especially on the glass side. Aluminum hurt us early in the year last year, but they've caught up, and supply is not as big an issue today as it was, say, 12 or even 6 months ago. Now, in terms of the, Dr. Duncan mentioned affordability, and the supply side has really driven up our costs. We put our budget together in December of 2021. We looked for stable pricing, and when the Ukrainian war took off, all of our suppliers in a matter of about 4 days had met with us either in our corporate headquarters or called us and said our prices are going up. So it forced us to take another additional price increases. An interesting stat, my son lives here in Fargo, and we were looking at a house for him and his girlfriend. And a house today to build in Fargo in 2019 was about $300,000 for one of those starter houses, right? That you see in all the developments. Today it's about 80% more expensive. So you're looking at $500,000 for a young couple to move into a new starter home in Fargo, in one of the developments. So it's the affordability issue, especially for that group of home buyers. Has been driven a lot by supply. And then the other thing in just inflation, wages. Everybody's had to increase wages, so have our suppliers, and that doesn't go away. That's there. Lumber has come down a little bit, aluminum's come down a little bit, but wages are there, and that's driving cost. In terms of supply and bringing supply in, Marvin does not source anything from foreign countries directly. Our suppliers do, right? So they feel the impact, but we don't. We're vertical on a lot of our key commodities to make our products: fiberglass, wood. We make all our own. But we've seen a trend where our suppliers are starting to move out of China, especially on the hardware side. They've done it. They're already doing it, and they're going to Mexico. They're tired of dealing with the ports. They're tired of dealing with the tariffs, and they've moved a lot of that production to Mexico. We've seen that from our largest aluminum supplier as well. Just moved, opening up a new facility in Mexico.
And so, from a raw goods standpoint, is it just the production, or are there enough of the raw good product, the raw product that you need in Mexico that was in China, or is it just everything was in China because it was just so dirt cheap?
Yeah, it was definitely price driven. In terms of is there enough commodity material, we're still feeling the effects of the Texas storms.
Really?
Yeah, it's still resins and things like that. At times they're hand to mouth. Now it's better. It's much better than it was, say 3 or even 4 months ago. But that took 18 months to correct itself, just the Texas storm. So it points back to the point that Dr. Duncan made, is that the suppliers really had constricted their capacity, and for them to ramp up and meet the demand, it was very difficult.
Yeah. So I'm going to go back to the agriculture world, Randy. So as we're talking about, maybe we're not as popular in the world market with some of our stuff. These specialty crops have really been coming up. I think it was probably a decade ago now. My stepdad, we had 1,000 acres of sunflowers. We got that horrible disease. Thank God we didn't have to plow everything under. Some of our neighbors did. So we went to canola, which, nobody, when you see a swath in the field that's this high, and as a kid, you look at it and go, how am I going to get that in the combine? But a great product. It's been wildly popular for us. Is there a new canola on the horizon? Is it some of these specialty, whether it's pasta, whether it's, a soy product? Do you see some of those? And as always happened on the farm with my relatives, innovation was my, grandpa looking at one of my other relatives going and saying, you know what a guy should do? He should grow this. And then, now we got canola. Is there that new commodity out there?
There's a few that are coming on, becoming more popular. Right, canola is a big one that's really entered into the market in North Dakota, especially the north central part of the state and the northeast part of the state, because of, it yields well, and then it's also a healthy product. Yeah. So a lot of the canola oil goes more towards the human consumption side because of its health aspects. We do also have other specialty crops. Feed barley or barley is becoming a lot more popular. I mean, everybody knows, of course, you need barley for malt, right? Yep. To make beer. Everybody likes that.
That's the only thing they use it for, right?
Right.
I mean, it's as far as I heard, but yeah.
But now there's a challenge to that, and that is the pet food market. Whereas a lot of barley now being raised is going into the pet food market. So that's a new specialty crop that's come online that's really gained a lot of popularity. So the biggest trouble that we're looking at as far as how we're looking at an acres base, and right now a lot of producers are looking at what acres to plant, and we're also in what we call our most important risk management time frame for agriculture. We're setting our crop insurance prices the month of February, and that is going to set basically the tone of what we're going to look at for acres.
Right.
What's surprising is that durum right now is holding a premium to spring wheat on the crop insurance price, so we're likely going to see an increase in durum acres.
Wow.
That's something we haven't seen in years. So we're looking at likely see more durum acres, we'll see more barley acres, and then depending on where the input costs come into play, we might see some of the edible beans carry a little bit more weight. Sure. But we're still not going to force ourselves away from corn and beans.
Right.
Those are going to be the staples for the northern plains. Wheat is probably going to lose out a little bit because of, one, our exports are down, the demand side of things, but also because it's expensive to raise wheat, it's cheaper to raise some of these other crops.
Yeah. Wait till I go home and have to tell the family that it's going to be between the dog and my beer. I mean, that's, because God knows if you want to make money, find something you can sell to pet owners and you'll make $1 million, right? So now, God help us, it's going to be beer or pet food. So to that point, Camille, how does the technology, when we're talking about where to, these maximizing these acres, how does that technology, are you guys getting into that part of the specialty part of it where, all right, well, this is where you're looking at for soybeans. However, if you'd like to grow some durum, I know 2 Whole Foods completely, I can hear the marketing campaign on the dog food that would be way better than let's go have a Budweiser or Miller. We want to make sure market to everybody.
Yeah, where we have really played at Bushel, and I touched on earlier, is giving that insight into what is your true cost of production, which it's really interesting when you ask, like if you were to go ask 10 farmers what is your true cost of production, not all of them know. They might be within a 10% swag, 20% swag, and I've even gotten the response, "Oh, I don't really want to know." They don't really want to know what it is because they're afraid to know the number. But I think in terms of, how is technology going to influence the decisions that are being made in agriculture, it does go back to something Dr. Duncan said earlier about one of the things that he believes to be non-transitory, and that is the decarbonization efforts that are going on. Randy talked about these soy crushing plants being built across the U.S. and kind of the mid and upper plains where soybeans are being grown. They're doing that because the soy crushing plants create biodiesel, and it's aviation fuel, and it has a lower carbon score. And so these airlines find a way to get their carbon goals met by, producing this commodity or producing this aviation fuel that's created through soybeans. So it's those types of insights into what is going to drive revenue. Now, I think one of the missing pieces, and this is somewhat to do with technology that can help farmers figure out that cost of production and their P&L, but it's being able to really understand what are the crops that we're able to grow, and the other thing with the decarbonization aspect of it, because there's been a ton of investment from venture capital, institutional investors into technology companies that are focused on carbon, whether it's, paying farmers to, prove out their agricultural practices so that they can put carbon credits in a carbon market. But the biggest feedback that I keep hearing from farmers is, when these contracts are first coming out for farmers to sign up for these carbon companies to be able to sell their credits in, they were asking farmers to sign 20-year contracts up front. Are you kidding me? Who would do that?
They've met a German Norwegian farmer from North Dakota, clearly.
Yeah, they're too stubborn to do anything like that for 20 years. So it's really interesting, and I think what it comes down to is this is a question that's continually asked from this decarbonization standpoint in agriculture that is trying to use technology to prove these things out, is who is going to pay for it?
Right.
The consumer is demanding it. The climate is demanding it. Governments are demanding it. But who is ultimately going to pay for it? And that is a question that is unanswerable at this point.
And I can hear my grandpa McMorrin in the background saying, and who's going to make the most money on this?
Yeah, exactly.
The investors, a lot of the folks, they know exactly how much that carbon credit is today and what the growth is. The farmer may not, look, I've got a bunch of turkey poop on my farm that I can burn now. I don't know what it's worth. I used to just give it to the neighbor, and we'd spread it for fertilizer. And I think that's, at least from my kind of outside view, but that's what farmers are wondering about too when they sign up for producers, sorry. What is the deal? Why do you want to lock me into a 20-year deal when I'm not sure I understand how much this is going to be worth? And as those carbon credit, as the need or the want for those carbon credits go up, the price is going to go up. And if that farmer's locked in here, it doesn't take even a skeptical farm kid who lives in the suburbs now to figure that one out.
Right.
So Darren, going back, and you get the really tough question. We're, Minnesota, it's the Fargo-Moorhead West Fargo Chamber, so we're going to step a little bit onto the Minnesota side. We're at the legislative session. There's a 17.6, just for those that are keeping score. The 0.6 is still $600 million. So we have a $17.6 million surplus. It looks like it'll probably go north of, my guess, maybe 19, 20 billion, which, even in government terms is a lot of money. The economy seems to be going on pretty good. What if there were two things that you could recommend to the folks down in St. Paul to help Minnesota be competitive with our North Dakota neighbors, but also in the Midwest? Where do you spend that money, and then what do you not do to make it more difficult to manufacture in the state of Minnesota?
Well, what we'd like to see is regulation. It is very difficult in Minnesota on the regulatory side to even do any changes in your factories.
Yeah.
Air permits, things like that are just, it's very difficult. It's a lot longer process than it is in other states, including North Dakota here, which has done a good job helping us manage that. So regulation is a big one. And we manufacture in our rural communities. Senator Klobuchar was just in Warroad. And up in our rural communities, we need help with childcare.
Yeah.
We have people that want to go to work, and so we're having to do it ourselves, going on our own as a company to try to find ways to solve the childcare problem. So those are probably the two biggest things in the state of Minnesota.
And we should, Dr. Duncan, if you're still here, we're gonna make T-shirts. Shannon, I'd like a Dr. Duncan T-shirt with then one of his charts underneath for next year, and I'll wear it up on stage. But to follow up on one of his questions or one of his points is that housing in rural Minnesota. I've also heard not to toss it into you're a window manufacturer, but that's also the biggest problem, right? You have people driving from Grand Forks, up to Warroad or to Grafton to work, and that's, even in a rural area, an hour in the car is an hour in the car one way. How do you see that going? Or is that problem gotten any better, or has that also gotten worse where you're still looking for, and whether it's manufacturing, whether it's accounting, I mean, from what I've heard, it's the whole life cycle of your company.
It's gotten better, but we've taken care of it ourselves. And we've built, the company is literally sponsored building single-family homes. We have people that want to move to Warroad and work in Warroad.
I heard you guys
but they
play
don't have
hockey up
housing.
there.
And we play a little hockey up there. Yeah, that's right. We got a really good hockey team this year.
You do.
So we've literally built 20 single-family homes, carrying the paper on them, and we use it, to recruit people to come live there. There's been some private groups in partnership with the city that are putting up apartment complexes right now. We have 70 units going up right now. We have another 70 coming online this fall. We've got these single-family homes, so we're getting no help, and we're having to go at it ourselves.
What are the occupancy rates on those apartment buildings?
They are full.
Yep. That's it.
They're full.
Kind of knew that. Okay, so we're going to try to get into, we had about 15 minutes left, so if you have questions, submit them. I've got a few up here I'll try to get to. QRS code, it's right there on the middle of your table, or chamberquestions.com. So move into a little bit of a lightning round as the questions pop up here. So overall, we've heard the housing, we've heard some of the challenges in the industry. What, on a scale of 1 to 5, where do you see the outlook? 5 being awesome and great, we've got the future is bright. 1 being God help us. I'll start with Darren. We'll go back with you. 1 to 5, and then what's the one thing that gives you hope, and what's the one thing that gives you pause?
Yeah, so in our industry as a whole, I'm going to give it, a 4. I think housing has been underserved. We're underbuilt. The affordability is an issue, but there's still demand there. We're investing for the future. We think this next decade is going to be great. There's going to be a little bit of a slowdown coming, but we think it's going to be great. So we're really optimistic about that. We're investing for it. Of course, anything on the geopolitical side or the economy, just you can't control it.
Yeah.
But that seems to be the disruptor for us.
Sure. Camille?
Within tech, I'm going to borrow Darren's 4 on this because, I'm Midwest farm kid. I can't be too optimistic about something, but not too pessimistic
It's not in your DNA.
either.
It's not allowed, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of pragmatism that's rooted in me. But I think within technology, there's always going to be increased opportunity, and sometimes the obstacle can be the way, right? Like figuring out how to get around or over or under the obstacle, and I think technology companies are going to have to do that. There's a correction happening, as I talked about earlier, in being able to borrow capital to grow your company. And I think the correction's actually good. I think there was kind of this heyday of money flowing everywhere, and I call it spaghetti throwing money. A lot of these companies were getting this cheap capital and just throwing the money at the wall to see what stick. I can think of multiple companies that have 20 different spaghetti throwing ideas on the wall, and you got to do that in innovation, right? You don't know what's going to stick, but at the same time, you need to be judicious with the money you're spending. So I'm optimistic, but I think there's some course correcting that's going to happen within just kind of the overall construct of how capital is deployed in technology and how technology companies are expected to grow.
Right. So, agriculture, you always have to be at a 2.5, right? Because it could rain tomorrow, we could have a great spring and then a horrible fall. So I'll preface it that way. But listening and knowing, God bless them, all the farmers that I know, my family, they're the most pessimistic, optimistic people in the world, right?
We have to be, because there's always next year.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the one thing we look forward to.
Exactly.
Is that you look at ag, and again, you tell me what the weather is going to be like this year in the U.S., and I can tell you how ag is going to go. But right now, I guess I would take a stance and say that I'm going to split the difference and go to a 3.5.
Right. Which is glowing for anybody in agriculture. So congratulations.
But what I'm worried about is that we are going to see maybe a little bit of right now, Brazil is sitting on the potential of a huge crop of soybeans, which is going to take away our market.
Yep.
The exports will switch from the U.S. to Brazil in the next month.
Okay.
They are having some trouble with their corn crop, which might bring corn demand up. Our wheat demand isn't going to recover, but in the big picture, I would say that we are going to be looking at a decent spring. I'm going to break this up in two 6-month time frames. Up until June, we're going to have a decent opportunities.
Yeah.
From then, if we look like we're going to have a good crop in the U.S., we're going to build stocks, we're going to see a larger than expected crop. And with our expenses where they're at, they've come down, but they're still pretty high. I think we're going to have a second half of 23 that is going to be come to Jesus moment for a lot of producers.
All right. So as the saying goes, you know, the children are our future. I want to get into that development side. And Camille, I'm going to start with you because you kind of got into that. The workforce challenges are everywhere. The smart money, do you say, not the spaghetti throwers, but the smart money is looking not just at the college graduates now, and probably not even high school, but into the grade schools. What do you see from a technology standpoint? What are the companies you work with, or Bushel in particular, to reach into the school systems now instead of, and my wife's a teacher, 22 years, so full disclosure, I'm not being harsh in the teaching profession, but we're maybe not teaching to the jobs that we need. We're teaching to what we've been doing for the last 50 years because that's what we do. How is your sector reaching into the youth and then even into the junior high level to encourage technology or to encourage people to get into your field?
Yeah, I would say we don't have like a systematic approach to it at this point, but we're of course always looking at the next generation of workforce that's going to come into technology. There's a couple of things happening. I think if I'm remembering correctly, somebody feel free to correct me on it. The state of North Dakota is having more programming or instructional curriculum within the technology realm, whether that's like software and engineering or on the software engineering side, and going into some classrooms and having it, I don't know if it's maybe an elective or just having more awareness and training around it. One other thing, in Fargo, there is the Emerging Digital Academy. So this isn't, it's actually like correcting the issue of we maybe didn't build awareness to some of those younger kids early on, or we as a economy didn't realize that some of these tech jobs were going to be important. So the Emerging Digital Academy is now bringing in people who are already in a career, but they want to get into software development. And so it's a several week course, deep dive, where they learn some of the fundamentals of software development. And then they get internships with companies. We've hired people through it at Bushel and have brought interns in and then hired to full-time. So it's kind of course correcting that. But I think even before we start to create curriculum around it, it's the exposure that kids can have to these careers. I mean, quite frankly, me growing up, the leadership positions that I saw in my small town were like teachers. There were a couple of women in business that I looked up to, but it's kind of one of those things, like you got to see it to believe you can be it. And so exposing our kids to those types of careers as well, that's why I think, the career day or whatever is always important for kids. But I think that exposure is important. And then just to tie into it, and I'll be quiet so you can move on to the next person. But
no, for this audience, especially when you're talking workforce, believe me, we've got to do something different. What we're doing isn't working.
I'm also I have continued interest in how this new world of work, particularly with the skilled workers in technology, where you can work anywhere as long as you have good enough bandwidth to get online. I'm really curious how this will positively impact our rural communities. As someone who grew up in a small town and didn't move too far away from the farm, I always appreciated the people that stayed back home and kept our small communities running and growing to the degree that they could. But now think about a software developer that really wants to stay in Ada, Minnesota, where I went to high school, and their salary is $100,000+. Those types of jobs don't exist in a lot of the small towns, and now you're bringing in these high value or highly paid jobs into these rural communities, because people can work anywhere, and they can choose to work where their family is, or they can choose to work where they grew up. I don't know that we've necessarily, seen it yet. I know out in Lakes Country, east of here in the Detroit Lakes, Otter Tail area, there's a lot of people that moved out there permanently during the pandemic because if you can live anywhere, why wouldn't you live next to a lake? So it's really interesting how this is going to impact particularly the rural economies, when for so long it was like everybody's moving to cities, everybody's moving to cities, everybody's moving to cities. But it's going to be interesting, and I think it's an opportunity for a lot of us and all the chambers that are on here in some of these smaller communities to really attract people to live, work, and play in these smaller communities, but you might work for a bigger company elsewhere.
But, and you actually almost got to the last lightning round questions, the work from home thing. But and God bless you, my daughter Reagan. So my dad's a geodetic engineer. Clearly, I was in politics and talk for a living, so it skipped a generation. But begging my daughter, please be an electrical engineer, honey. You'll have a $150,000 a year job tomorrow. And well, let's just say I haven't made the deal yet. So she said, math sucks, Dad. It's boring. Great. How do you make that interesting? So Darren, I mean, obviously in agriculture, the recruiting pool isn't very deep, right? I mean, Randy, sorry. I'm looking at Randy saying, Darren, you're either your family's in it and you're gonna take over the farm, or there's probably gonna get passed on to somebody else. What, with the technology, maybe with some of the new crops, maybe with being able to do a lot more with a lot less as technology, as maybe driverless tractors and driverless equipment come on board. But how do we get kids? I mean, I'm Exhibit A. I don't live back on the farm in Webster. I'm in Maple Grove, Minnesota, in the Twin Cities. How do we make it more appealing, or how do we make it more enticing to bring those kids back to the farm?
Well, agriculture, it's a little tougher. I mean, you're right. You kind of do have your own built-in workforce because it's mainly passed on from generation to generation, and it's putting the love of the land into the children or into your kids that makes them want to come back. And it's not that they don't go someplace and try something for a while and then come back with a new perspective, but that's part of it. Technology is certainly adding to helping to encourage producers or farmers, whichever word you want to use, to
farmers is good with me. Yeah.
So to innovate and to expand.
Mm-hmm.
So that also encourages a few more kids to come back to the farm. But the trouble gets to be is when you get to be that economics of scale, when you get to be too large for one guy to do it, and you need to bring in hired help, and that gets to be a trouble. And I do know that a lot of producers depend on South African labor to come.
We have 2 guys that come in every spring. Yep.
Yeah,
Actually, this year it'll be 3 because as farmers are retiring, our farm's getting bigger, so now we have 3.
Yeah, a lot of them depend on retired farmers that they rent land, or they bring in the South Africans to come in and help. And that's really what's probably going to help keep expanding the acres and the operations going forward, is foreign labor that can come in on a needed basis.
And if we had another hour, we'd get into the immigration discussion, which I know Shannon has had a couple of different panels on. So, Darren, the idea that we want to get kids back into welding and shop class and that, great concept. I wish we had shop class in Maple Grove, because I could probably teach my daughter how to weld, but Reagan's not going to weld. But as we're finding now in this new economy and out of the pandemic, we need skilled labor that's not, no offense to the University of North Dakota, or there's a school here in Fargo I heard of too. I don't remember the name of it, but there's one here in Fargo. What if you don't want to get a 4-year degree? What if you want to go into welding in 2 years, or maybe even 18 months? You're on the job and you're making 50, 60 grand a year. Are you able to make that case a little better, or is it still a challenge? Is it still tough to get kids back?
It's very challenging, but as was mentioned, you have to show them the way. And we're into schools. We're into schools showing them the opportunities in manufacturing. That's critical. And I think Karen and the team here in Fargo are down in the 5th and 6th and 7th grade level, starting to nurture that and show the way. And again, we always look at how can we help ourselves. So we stood up our own community college in Warroad in partnership with Northland Community College, and you can get an accredited degree in mechatronics. We bring in interns, we hire all kinds of summer kids, show them opportunities, ask them what they're interested in, try to put them in a field that they want to learn about, and that seems to serve us best. But exposure is probably key, biggest opportunity.
So bring your kid to work day at Marvin is actually exciting, right? We get to play with tools and manufacturing.
That's right.
So in the 2 minutes we have left, I want to bring up something Camille touched on too. Probably a bigger issue for those of us who live down in the Twin Cities, but it's also, I think it's an opportunity up there. It's a challenge down, because it's hard to get people to go back downtown and work in the towers. How do you see that work from home, that component? Obviously, Darren, it's a little more difficult because you got to have folks in the shop, but how do you see that maybe as a supplement to your business or an augment to your business to help the manufacturing side? Is that something going forward? I'll start with you, Darren. And just that work from home, do you see it as a challenge? Is it an opportunity? Or is it just not a part of your business?
No, it's part of our business. We have hundreds of professionals that, like I mentioned earlier, we sent home. We didn't send any of our factory workers home and the support functions for them. They were, critical to infrastructure, so they kept working. But hundreds of professional workers work from home. We've called them back to the office now 3 days a week. We felt it was important for our culture, for our innovation, for collaboration, relationships, and so we've got them back working from home, or back working in the offices. So we've tried to thread the needle on that to meet them where they want to be met, but then also meet the company needs. And the 3 days a week, we call them 3 anchor days, is working well for us right now.
Yeah, and from Camille, you're talking about the opportunity. Do you see technology capturing it, looking at it as an opportunity and seeking out? I mean, a hardworking North Dakota farm kid versus, no offense, 3 or 4 of the kids that my daughter hangs out with down in the Twin Cities, I'd put them up against that. But is the technology market understanding that value and seeking it out?
Oh, yes.
Okay, good.
So,
right answer to the right question, right?
And I'm pretty sure my Minnesota accent came out real strong on that one.
It did.
Oh, yes. Okay, so prior to COVID at Bushel, we had, call it 140 team members, and all but 10 to 15 were in Fargo, in and around Fargo-Moorhead in the office. COVID hits. This is the same story many of you experienced. We were already having trouble hiring people here because, in the Fargo-Moorhead, West Fargo area, it was really a rob Peter to pay Paul type of experience. We have such a lovely area. It's hard to attract a ton of people all at once here. So we started to hire around the country to, mostly kind of Midwest-based people. Omaha kind of was a hub. But other technology companies started to see that too. So you saw companies from the coast starting to come into our region and look at, centers of excellence of companies and start to poach people from there. So you started really to compete on a national level. And, it's kind of a cliche anecdote at this point, but it was because of the work ethic of a lot of the people in this region. You could just, from a company perspective, the folks around here work longer and harder. It's not 100% true everywhere, but they definitely saw a difference there. So we started getting competition, not from anyone around here, but from the coast as well, trying to compete, so.
And I should apologize to any of my daughter's friends who may be watching online. I'm not insulting your work ethic, just going on stats here. From the agriculture, it's the ultimate work from home job, right? You can't go anywhere else. But how can technology or someone working from home in Fargo or the Twin Cities or Des Moines help that production on the farm so that you have more workforce hours on the farm versus sitting in front of the computer shuffling the papers like Camille was talking about?
You're right. We are the ultimate work-at-home people because, you're working at your farm. And when COVID hit, we were also isolated, which we are anyway. So it didn't really impact the production agriculture side. But what this does is it opens it up so that a spouse could, somebody could come back to the farm and take over the farm, and their spouse can continue to work or hold their off-farm job someplace else using technology as a way to, like you said, the bandwidth is all that matters. And even with my job, I can do it anywhere. The trouble is my wife has figured that out, and she wants to go someplace warm for the winter. But
that's not a bad thing. You can. This is unseasonable weather. I told Dr. Duncan that this isn't how it usually is. So.
This is bad. This is nice. We can deal with this. Yeah. But yeah, I think what it'll help do is encourage some of the next generation to come home with yet their spouse working off farm with another job.
Yeah. Well, we've run out of time. We could probably go for another half an hour. So please thank Darren, Camille, and Randy for joining us here today. If you have any questions, I know their names and their companies are on the brochures on your table. I'm sure if you have any questions, look them up on Google, LinkedIn, wherever. I'd be happy to answer questions. We're going to take a quick 10-minute break, let you get some coffee, recharge, and then we'll be back up here for the next panel. But thanks again, folks. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you, Camille. Appreciate it. Thanks, Aaron. Appreciate it, too. That was awesome.
kissing me, all I need. Plus we got history. I used to love him, he used to love me. Yeah, we go way, 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 way back. We love, love, love like that. Now I still love him, and he still loves me. Yeah, we go way, 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 way back. We love, love, love like that. Way, 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 way back. I didn't know I felt the way I did before. It's nothing I did, and now I guess I'm sure. It's like we never really ever closed that door. It's nothing we did, and now our hearts want more. Baby, you're so perfect, but he's the perfect one for me. I know that you're worth it, but something about him gets to me, all I need. Plus we got history. I used to love him, he used to love me. Yeah, we go way, 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 way back. We love, love, love like that. Now I still love him, and he still loves me. Yeah, we go way, 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 way back. We love, love, love like that. Way, 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 way back. Baby, you're so perfect, but he's the perfect one for me. I know that you're worth it, but something about him gets to me, all I need.
Ladies and gentlemen, please find your seats. The second half of the Midwest Economic Outlook Summit will begin shortly.
This is your region. These are your resources. This is your reliable, affordable, cleaner than ever electricity. We're all in on all of the above energy.
Symphonies exploding in the sky. With you, I'm alive. Like all the missing pieces of my heart, they finally collide. So stop time right here in the moonlight, 'cause I don't ever wanna close my eyes. Without you, I feel broke, like I'm half of a whole. Without you, I've got no hands to hold. Without you, I feel torn like a sail in a storm. Without you, I'm just a sad soul. I'm just a sad I'm just a sad soul. With you, I fall. It's like I'm leaving all my past in silhouettes upon the wall. With you, I'm a beautiful mess. It's like we're standing hand in hand with all our fears upon the edge. So stop time right here in the moonlight, 'cause I don't ever wanna close my eyes. Without you, I feel broke, like I'm half of a whole. Without you, I've got no hands to hold. Without you, I feel torn like a sail in a storm. Without you, I'm just a sad soul.
I'm just a sad song. I'm just a sad song. You're the perfect melody, the only harmony I wanna hear. You're my favorite part of me. With you standing next to me, I've got nothing to fear. Without you, I feel broke, like I'm half of a whole. Without you, I've got no hand to hold. Without you, I feel torn like a sail in a storm. Without you, I'm just a sad song. I'm just a sad song. I'm just a sad I'm just a sad I'm just a sad song. In the stars tonight, so watch me bring the fire, set the night light. Shoes on, get up in the morning, cup of milk, let's rock and roll. Kink out, kick the drum, rolling on like a rolling stone. Sing song when I'm walking home, jump up to the top of the brown. Ding dong, call me on my phone, nice tea, and I'll get my ping pong. 'Cause it's
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Kurt Zellers back to the stage.
Well, good morning. So for those of you in the room, to get everybody in the hallway, this is a trick I learned at another event. We're going to all start clapping really loud, because then the people in the hallway are going to wonder what the hell's going on in there, and they'll go bump again. So everybody, let's wave a really loud round of applause. For yourselves, welcome back. Look, here they come. They're literally walking in the doors as we speak. So anybody else at the next conventions, you can steal that, use it for your own. Our next panel is going to have just a couple of topics that, get a little close to, each other. We've got healthcare, energy, and banking, because after all, that's not a broad topic, but really do have great panelists. I know two of them very well, and Stacy I've had a chance to meet this morning. So first I'm going to welcome to the stage John Tuma. He's the commissioner one of the commissioners from the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission. Besides being on that, is a former public servant, so spent some time in the legislature, learned a great deal from John. So welcome to the stage, John. Second, I'm going to invite Stacy Ackerman to come up. She's the managing director for Wells Fargo Private Bank. As a Wells Fargo customer since 1993. Thank you, Stacy. I have some questions afterwards. And then lastly, Jeff Bartsch, who is the Senior Vice President of Market Growth and Retention from Medica, also a lobbyist down at the Minnesota Capitol. So whenever I had healthcare questions, I would bring the bill over and say to Jeff, I don't get it. What does it do? And he'd say, just vote no. It's really easy. So welcome, everybody. And again, it's 45 minutes. We're going to, again, if you see on the top of your table there, that little icon, please put your questions in there, or chamberquestions.com, submit them. We're going to cover a lot of ground, so we would like to get some questions from the audience, though, so that we make sure that you guys are alive out there. Otherwise, Shannon will bring around mirrors and put them under your nose to make sure you're still breathing. First and foremost, the foreign influence, we had that question before with, some of the stuff in agriculture, manufacturing, supply chain. It's not that much different from finance and energy and whatnot. So, Stacy, I'll start with you first. The impact of the geopolitical landscape on the financial markets. How have you seen that affecting, especially here locally again in the Upper Midwest, but then across the country compared to other countries?
Well, thank you for that question. So we did talk about audience participation. So hopefully some of you are familiar with Billy Joel and can help me finish these lyrics. So I'm going to start with Harry Truman, Doris Day, Red China, Johnny Ray. Yes.
Nice. I heard it out there in the corner over here. They were loudest over here, so way to go, you guys.
There we go. Well, you get three more tries. South Pacific, Walter Winchell, Joe DiMaggio. Joe McCarthy, Richard Nixon, Studebaker. Television, yes. Last, North Korea, South Korea, Marilyn Monroe. So you wonder, why did I bring that up? Why are we starting with that? And Billy Joel wrote this song when he was turning 40, 1989, and he was visiting with one of his good friends who was 21 years old. And his friend said, this is a horrible time to be 21 years old. Billy Joel started reflecting back to when he was 21, what was happening both within the United States as well as, we use the term geopolitically, but, internationally at that time. And it wasn't a good landscape. So when we think about these geopolitical events, right now, certainly COVID-19 in March of 2020, we see what happened to the market. The market dropped almost 30% in just a couple of weeks, recovered by August. We think back to the financial crisis of 2007 to 2009. That was a little longer. That sell-off lasted a year, and certainly those percentages were a little higher. They were about 57%. But guess what? The market recovered. Last year, February, what happened? Russia invaded Ukraine. We're all worried about what's going to happen with energy from Russia, what's going to happen to wheat, which Randy helped us with. So what happens is you get these short-term crises, the market drops, and I want you to picture an EKG machine, right? The market drops, your heart rate goes up. We feel really vulnerable, we feel really exposed, we want to take action. But what I would say is when we have these types of events, to put them into perspective and to think about them as long-term opportunities. Now, certainly, we have to do the disclosures. When we think about the market's past performance is no guarantee of future results. However, we do have a long history, and we can see that these do turn into opportunities. So if I would have one message when we see future geopolitical events occur, is basically stay calm and carry on.
And they already have T-shirts for that, so it's really easy to go. So
we're going to have a whole website by the time we're done here. Shannon's going to love it.
So
She's going to be able to brand
one quick
it.
follow-up question in 17 minutes or less. Do you think that the markets, and do you think investors, especially in the United States, have we gotten better or worse after COVID, the Russian invasion? We're seeing some pretty big pulling out of Afghanistan, some big global things. Have we gotten better or worse at adapting to those that geopolitical crises, as far as either keeping calm or do we freak out and the markets go up and down?
So my question for all of you would be: has human nature changed? Probably not. So when we don't know what's going to happen, that uncertainty, it's really uncomfortable, right? We want to grab the reins, we want to do something. And that can be really challenging, which I know, leads into your next question. So back in December, we had a conference in New York City. It was our investment symposium for our clients. And the name of this conference was, I want to make sure I get it right, Navigating the Certainty of Uncertainty. Markets don't like uncertainty. Human beings, we don't like uncertainty, right? And so we want to look ahead and we want to be able to plan and say, gosh, what's going to happen on the horizon so I can plan for that? And so we had Rick Reeder. He was the BlackRock Chief Investment Officer for Global Fixed Income. And he got a similar question, like, have we gotten better? Did we put our emotions on the back seat? And then what's going to happen? And he said, I don't know. And now some of you are like, Shannon, I'd like my money back. These panelists are no experts whatsoever. But what he said is, if someone says they know what's going to happen in the future, they're either lying or they're arrogant. So, what does that mean for us? It means we can plan, we can test. If you are a nonprofit, it's having that rainy day fund as your endowment. If you're a corporation, having that liquidity, not getting overextended. For all of you as individual investors, making sure you have some of that additional cash flow on hand, 6 to 12 months. So what I would say is, making sure that you're consulting your advisors. One last comment I would make is what do we know? What's going to happen this year? And we're going to see continued pressure on corporate earnings. And why do I say that? I can take everyone who spoke earlier today, and we can encapsulate into we're seeing higher wages. We're trying to entice people into the workforce. We still have more open jobs than people who want to fill them. That's a challenge. Baby boomers, we love you. You're educated. You're a big workforce. And we talk a lot about recession, but there's another R word. Retirement. You want to retire, and you are entering your peak retirement years here in 2023, 2024. So that's going to cause continued pressure on wages. So we're going to see higher wages. We've talked about interest rates. If you're borrowing, it's going to be more expensive. Still historically low, by the way. We forget that. Some of you in this audience probably remember a mortgage of 11% or 12%.
From Wells Fargo, no offense. I mean, we knew that was going to be uncomfortable anyway, but yeah.
Right. So historically still low, but from a year ago, wow, you went from 3% to 6%. That's a big jump and makes a big impact on your payments. What else is going to impact earnings? We've talked about interest rates, we've talked about wages, the geopolitical environment, COVID, right? We had the 2010s where were just amazing. Like we were hoping the 2020s were going to be the new roaring 20s. I think we had that in 2010. We had a very stable supply chain. We had still continued growth. Our products were much less expensive, right? They were going down. Now that's flipped on us, right? We're going to have this deglobalization. We want to make sure we're building some resiliency into our supply chains. So we're bringing that back to the United States where we don't have workers, where we need to borrow, and it's going to cost more. So we're going to see that pressure on earnings. Intel just said they're going to invest $20 billion in 2 advanced chip plants. We're going to have to pay for that. The stimulus we received during COVID, we're going to have to pay for that. So we will see continued pressure on earnings. January was a great month in the market. Don't look at your December 31 statements. Look at January 31st, much better. But we'll probably still see that volatility here the first half of the year. But looking into the second half of the year, markets tend to get out in front of a recession. And so we might start seeing a turn in the second half of the year with the market.
Better weather and a turn. Fantastic. Dr. Duncan's t-shirts are getting more exciting. So Jeff, there's not been much in healthcare the last few years. You guys have been hanging on, just everything's cool as the other side of the pillow, right? So through COVID, through all of the things, the telemedicine, staying home, access, testing, supply, there have been new and innovative technology improvements, both here domestically, but also in foreign countries that they say that necessity is the mother of invention, right? Well, this was the mother of all necessity with COVID. What have you seen in some of those technology advancements, and then how are we doing a good job here in the States? Is it more international? And then how are you at Medica or the healthcare industry? You're allowed to speak on behalf of all of them now. So Blue Cross Blue Shield is thrilled to have you up here. How are we doing with that innovation? How are we putting it into practice?
Yeah, first off, I just want to say thanks to the Chamber for hosting this event. I think it's great to be up here, and it's also great to be in person with such a large group talking about these issues.
Yeah, actually, let's just celebrate that, right? A year ago, we wouldn't have been here, so absolutely.
So healthcare from an economic standpoint is, I really look at it 2 ways. One is healthcare is still a large part of the economic engine of our country. There's a lot of positive things happening there, but I know for all of you in this audience, it's also a cost to do business, and affordability is a big concern. So when I answer your questions, we're going to try to look at them from both perspectives.
Sure.
I think unlike a lot of the other experts you're going to hear from, healthcare isn't impacted as much by what's happening outside of this country or what's happening geopolitically. It's because our healthcare system is unique in this country. Healthcare is still delivered locally. It's produced by people here in this area for the most part, and it's delivered by people locally in your area. And so when I think about those things that are impacting healthcare from a large standpoint, I tend to look out towards Washington, D.C., much more than I look outside of these borders. And I look at Washington not only as the largest regulator of this industry, but also as the largest purchaser. And the decisions they make for Medicare and Medicaid have a trickle-down impact on what's happening on care delivery, on the insurance industry. And for the most part, they have an impact of putting downward pressure on the cost of care delivery systems from them as a payer, and that has the impact of transferring those costs to all of you. So I'm watching much more closely what's happening in Washington, D.C. Than what's happening internationally. From a technology standpoint, similar situation. I think so much of what's happening in the advancement of medical technology or medical innovation is happening here in the United States. I can tell you it's amazing what we're doing from a treatment perspective related to technology and innovation. There are literally diseases and conditions that we could not cure 10 years ago that we can cure now through medications. It's just tremendous. And as someone who, like all of you, has family members who have interacted with the healthcare systems, what can be done now to treat people, the less invasive treatments, the quality of treatments is just tremendous. But all of those come with a cost. No one is developing new medical technology or new pharmaceutical technology and offering that free to the market. And so as an insurer, we're constantly looking at what is that value? What do we do to make sure that our members and the community at large has access to some of these new technologies, some of these life-saving treatments, but also doing so in a way where they're going to be able to afford access to not just those treatments, but everyday care. So we're watching technology very closely in terms of what it can do to improve medical care. The area where I think there's still a lot of improvement for technology and advancement in healthcare is what it does to improve the efficiency of how we deliver care. And I'll say whether it's the insurance industry or the care delivery industry, we've got a lot that we can learn from the pandemic and the advancement during that period of time from how we deliver care remotely. How do we turn that into an everyday practice that makes sense both for the consumer, so they're getting that care when they need it, but also for the care systems who still need a reliable source of revenue to make sure they have the infrastructure in place to take care of all of us.
Just one follow-up question, again, relating to workforce. How do you see that from a provider standpoint? And this is where, instead of saying doctors or nurses, I'll use the politically correct term. How do you see that in the upper Midwest, us up here versus around the country from just that workforce? I mean, we're always challenged with, it's a 60-mile drive, a 30-mile drive to get to your clinic or your hospital. How are we with that part of the equation? Are we okay? Do we need improvement?
No, I think actually the entire healthcare system is struggling with workforce issues right now, particularly when you look at care delivery and nurses in particular. I don't think it's a surprise to anyone here that I think pre-pandemic there was a shortage of nurses in the workforce. I think what you saw with the pandemic was not only an increased need for nurses, but what nurses and really all people delivering care during the pandemic went through was just a tremendous undertaking and tremendously taxing on them. If you know a physician, a nurse, a caregiver, please make sure, if you haven't already, to thank them for what they did during the pandemic to put themselves in danger, and also to make sure they were going to work every day to make sure that our loved ones had the care they needed. But that put a tremendous tax on the emotions of that workforce. A lot of them left, either early or because they were finding different opportunities to utilize their skills outside of a traditional care setting. We have seen new industries, new places where nurses in particular can utilize their skills and their profession to deliver care in non-traditional settings. So that's putting additional stress on the workforce. So your hospital system, your clinic system, they were already struggling to get the nursing staff and the care delivery staff they needed. Now you've got increased competition for those services, and the thing we really need is more training and more nurses and more non-physician workforce in the industry overall. You were asking Kurt, Reagan doesn't sound like she wants to be a mechanical engineer or maybe not a welder. I would encourage her to go into nursing. Not only do we need them, but I think the opportunities for nurses, and again, also really non-doctorate level caregivers, the opportunities for them in the future, I think, are going to be tremendous, both in terms of the wages they can earn, but the opportunities and the places they'll have to practice their profession.
So you got a head start on the question I'm going to ask all of you guys about that development. It'll come, as I asked the last panel. So John, energy, I mean, it's an important topic, but we in the upper Midwest especially, we don't have some of the, and I won't use the word, but the oh my God moments like California where, oh, maybe I will have power today, maybe I won't have power today. We have a really good, reliable source. But I don't think folks up here maybe understand the geopolitical, like some of the tensions around the world actually do affect our energy and our energy costs here. What do you see, again, in 20 minutes or less, what do you see in that global perspective? But then how is it affecting us here? And then how is the commission, the Public Utilities Commission, how are you guys looking to address that as those tensions continue or in some cases get easier? Because everybody here would clap the loudest if you said there's a rate cut coming next month.
There's a rate cut coming next month. No.
Well, everybody, we're going to wrap it up. Thanks, Shannon. Have a great afternoon. No.
Thanks, Kurt, for having me. And it's humbling being up here, being referred to as an energy expert. I am not that. I'm a backwater attorney from southern Minnesota who grew up building houses with my dad. And somehow, like Forrest Gump, I found myself standing up in front of you right now, or sitting here at least in front of you. But it's a pleasure. But probably one of the smartest things I did in my career, though, is I did hire or partnered with a gentleman from UND, graduated from UND, Dave Thompson.
It's a recurring theme, John. Every day I hear it.
So the good folk up from Grand Forks and East Grand Forks areas. So, but it's good to be here. Thank you for the chamber inviting us. I'm actually the second choice. The chair, Katie Sieben, apologizes that she couldn't make it. She had some family commitments today. Tough being a mom trying to raise 3 kids and be the chair of the Public Utilities Commission. So I try to fill in every time I can because I'm a little gray hair. My kids have already graduated. So my apologies for being the second choice. But I love telling stories. And to start to understand the geopolitical effect on utilities today, you really need to have 2 seminal dates in your head. The first seminal date is August 14th, 2023. Or 2003, excuse me, 2 decades ago, almost 2 decades ago. Back then, utilities operated as almost little balkanized utility interests. They had their exclusive territories. I won't go into the whole regulatory compact of why they did. But prior to 2003, that's pretty much the way utilities work. They had their own distribution facilities, they had their own customers, they had their own power plants. But for about 5 decades before that, they started to work together. They realized that, my neighbor has some power when I need it and he doesn't. I'm going to build a power line over there. Well, then they just started doing what was bilateral agreements, and they had the partner to the north, they had the partner to the west, they had the partner to the south that they interacted with and put power lines together. Used to be, they said that when America was first here, a squirrel could jump on a tree in Boston and get all the way to the Mississippi River and never touch the ground. That was because he could cross trees. Well, he could still do that now. He probably would die in the process because they're the worst terrorists that we have, and bringing your power system down is a squirrel. But if it was a smart squirrel, he could go all the way from Boston to San Diego and never touch the ground by staying on top of a power line. And so our utilities were smart. They're developers, and they thought about how we can interconnect and provide safe, reliable, and inexpensive energy by working with our neighbors. It really made a lot of sense and was quite successful until they realized their neighbor did something they didn't expect. And so we started in the 1970s, started having major blackouts, particularly on the East Coast. And on August of 2003, I won't name the utility, but in Ohio, they didn't clear out their trees under their big power line coming from one of their power plants that they partnered with their neighbors to build. And so it was all interconnected. And that power line, as you know, with simple physics, I guess, they tend to, when metal heats up, it expands and they start drifting. So if you're driving by power lines and you see it going like this, power's running through it. If it's more straight, it's probably not power running through that particular power line. And this power line dipped down and touched a tree and arced, and as power does, when things arc, they have breakers. And it broke that power plant off, and before we knew it, Cincinnati was blanked out. Pittsburgh was blacked out. Buffalo was blacked out. All the way up to Ottawa, New York City, Boston, and Philadelphia were blacked out. After hundreds of millions of dollars of lost economic activity, they realized, the utilities, we better get our act together. It was a seminal date. Actually, 3 years before that, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission had an order, called it Order 2000, said, look, utilities better voluntarily start working together to control this issue. Otherwise, we're going to get involved. And so the utilities, smart as they were, said, okay, we're going to follow up and do what you asked us to do and create what are known as regional transmission organizations, RTOs, as we know. Acronyms are all over in the utility industry, so I apologize if I use one and don't tell you what it is. But these are regional transmission organizations actually take over the operation of the power plants. The utilities hand them over to the RTO. They're members of this RTO. It's a nonprofit. We regulate them in some ways. Minnesota is part of two, MISO, which is the Midwest one, and SPP, which is the Southwest Power Pool. We're on the seam, actually, where we sit today. Moorhead is actually in SPP to the west, and Fargo is in MISO to the east. So the line between them is not exactly perfect. The reason Moorhead is because of some dams out on the Missouri River. WAPA is where they got their power from originally, and they ended up in SPP. And so these regional transmission organizations are critical to our future. The reason we haven't had a major power blackout in the last 2 decades is because these companies have worked together through these joint organizations and were effective. And one of the things they did, not only did they give over when the power plant was to turn on so that the system doesn't collapse. Energy is very fickle. If you don't have it just perfect, it will cause problems. Too much electrons on the system, it melts. Too few on the system, your computer doesn't work, okay? It does damage, okay? And so they have been very good at working to keep that system very balanced. But as they did, they also created a market. So when MISO goes to turn on a power plant needed to supply Fargo, they look at all the available power plants, because we overbuild. That's wise, but we overbuild our system so that it's reliable. It's usually, right now in SPP, 15% over your absolute top demand day in the year, and that only happens once a year. So we got way more power than we need on the system, upwards to 60, 70% we don't need. So MISO makes a decision, what is the cheapest plant that I can put on that system today? And as a result of it, your power over the last decade, okay, 2 decades, has been very stable and low up until another seminal event, okay? And that was Valentine's Day of 2021, okay? We know it in the industry as Storm Uri. It really wasn't a storm as we know it up here. It was a bad cold snap, okay, that went all the way down into Texas, and Texas was not prepared. They haven't planned as well as we have up in the Midwest. They have their own system, and they thought that somehow they could do it better. Well, they didn't. They didn't insulate their electric plants. They didn't insulate their gas wells, and as a result, the system collapsed. In part because we became dependent on gas. Natural gas became the fuel that was on that market, what we call on the margin. It was usually in the money because when the wind was blowing, they would always turn to those wind, because it's free. I don't have to pay for the fuel to turn a wind turbine. But when they needed gas, or we needed backup to that, gas was the cheapest. So gas has been beating coal, so if you hear about coal plants closing, it's because gas was cheap. And we deregulated gas in 1989, and it's kept the prices low, and we've been running on good, cheap gas for years. And then they've invented fracking, as you know, here in North Dakota, a real positive. Now we have lots of natural gas in the area. The price of natural gas remained very low. But all of a sudden, when that storm hit the south, they needed energy. They needed it bad. And when all those wires are interconnected, energy will go where there's a vacuum. It will just rush to that spot. Unless you shut it off, flip the switch, it's going to rush there. So we had a choice in SPP to shut off that power to Texas and let them suffer, or have rolling blackouts in Moorhead. And that's what happened. We had rolling blackouts in Moorhead because some knuckleheads in Texas thought they didn't have to insulate their power plants, okay? And so it's a weird situation, but gas now becomes a driver of energy costs in your energy market. And as you can guess, okay, prices for energy after Storm Uri went up quite a bit. There was the spike that we're paying for, and I won't go into that because that's a good hour of conversation.
And we
But-
just got them woke up, so don't
Yeah.
do that, John. I mean,
and so you've been paying probably gas at almost 2 times to 3 times of what you normally would have paid because of Storm Uri in 2021. And then the Ukraine invasion occurred, and that created a fear that we would have to send a lot of liquefied natural gas from Louisiana off to Europe. And so a lot of production ramped up, but it didn't bring down the cost for our electric plants. And of course, we heat our homes, or the building's probably heated by natural gas too. And so our area is dependent for our energy on natural gas prices. And so through 2022, natural gas prices remained high. Here's the good end of the story. Europe has had a very warm winter. And so as of the first of this year, the price of gas has dipped down below pre-pandemic levels. It's not down to what it was running during that really good time of the roaring tens, I guess we'll call it, but it is down. And you won't see that on your energy bill today, but you'll see it starting to show up on your energy bills in 6 months to the next year and a half. That's just the way we collect the cost of energy. When the bill is done, we estimate the cost of the gas over a period of time, and you collect it later, and if it's too much, we do a true-up, and you get the money back. And so if there is no extra wars in Saudi Arabia or in other key countries like Venezuela or something like that, that is going to cause disruption in our system, if the price of gas stays at where it's at now, you will see a stabilizing of your energy costs. But we used to not be reliant on what's happening geopolitically. Most of utilities didn't even worry about that. Now we are, both from that point and from also security standpoint.
and again, we're lucky up here that we don't suffer some of the coast. But so Jeff, I want to go back. You'd gotten a little bit into the technology, and just the state of the economy, and inflation's up, wages are up. It's harder to find workers. So how do you see just the outlook for this year? COVID shut down a lot of rural clinics and hospitals because there's some of that the care that was given in between the urgent care, the procedures, surgeries, electives, that kind of funded them. So how do you see the development just in the Midwest here in Minnesota and the upper Midwest, North Dakota? And then what is that, where are you as an industry, or maybe not as a church, but in the healthcare industry, where are you going for that workforce? And what are the challenges that you've been facing, and then are there solutions on the horizon?
Yeah, so there's a lot in that question, so, because there's a lot going on.
We only have 20 minutes
I
left,
know.
so don't, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I think right now when you look at the healthcare economy, I talked early on about the impact that Washington, D.C. and policy is having. We talked about workforce. I think supply issues impact healthcare too, and all those things are putting pressure on care delivery systems in terms of their costs. Well, those ultimately over time are going to find their way back into insurance premiums and ultimately the premiums that you and your members pay. I think you've got that cost pressure that's facing them right now. I think you've got the affordability issues that have been facing employers for a long period of time. That's creating some frustration. That frustration, I think, has given rise to, along with the pandemic and some of the technology advances, new players in the healthcare economy. A number of different entities that are coming up trying to pull pieces of care delivery, whether it's specialty care for certain conditions, whether it's big companies like Google or Amazon or Hackshire Birthway who are coming in and trying to invest money in rethinking how healthcare is financed and healthcare is delivered. There haven't been a lot of successes there, but there's certainly a lot of interest in investing in healthcare because that demand is not going away. So I think as we look short term, there's going to be a lot of pressure on healthcare because we're trying to make up for the same cost issues that are facing all industries. I think longer term, we're in a really unique opportunity to think about healthcare not just as a force in the economy, but think about it as a value or a benefit to all of you as employers and how you make sure you have a healthy, stable workforce. And so one of the things that we're doing, and one of the things I would encourage all of you to think about, is not necessarily those short-term solutions that might try to pull off a piece of our overall healthcare system for a short-term game, but what are those opportunities that we have right now in this stressed healthcare economy to create value, right? What are the things that create value for you as a consumer, for you as an employer, for you as a purchaser? And that's how we're looking at it. We're trying to invest in partnerships, one right here locally with Essentia Healthcare, to create products that are centered on a shared value between us as the insurer and Essentia as the care delivery partner, where we're able to make sure you're getting access to the right services in a reimbursement structure that is rewarding value, not just to the both of us, but to the community as a whole. Because healthcare, first thing I said is healthcare is local. It's going to continue to be local. So I think if we take a longer term view of the healthcare economy, there will be opportunity for investment. That's never going to end. There will always be people putting money into healthcare advancement. But I think for all of us as purchasers, it's a good time to think about affordability and how we invest our resources in the affordability of healthcare and the value we get out of what we purchase.
And Stacey, so when Camille was up here, she was talking about in the technology, ag technology, there was this, spaghetti thrower. So there's money out there, there's capital out there, they're throwing it against the wall to see what would stick. And we heard from Dr. Duncan about the need in the housing industry. So, banks still have money, as long as last time I checked. So you guys have a lot of cash available. We have a need out there. So what do you see? Where's that gulf in between there? Some of it's supply chain, but how do you see some of those small business owners, or in Jeff's point, some of those investors are looking to access those new markets and new innovation? Is there trouble in between we have a want, we have a need, and we got to get somebody to fill it, or is it improving? Did COVID kind of make us reevaluate what would be nice and what's necessary, and how is the investment getting from you at the banking level to that need to the home builder to build a house to help us with bring down the housing shortage that we have?
Well, you're really tapping into, I think, a really important conversation. And I know Yelena McWilliams, when she was the chairwoman of the FDIC, one of her main priorities was financial inclusion. So I look at when mom and dad bought their first house in Jamestown, North Dakota. I think we have the Jamestown Chamber on here. It was $25,000. My grandpa, who was a farmer, who said, "You are never going to be able to pay off and be able to afford that house." Fast forward to mid-90s, my husband Todd and I bought a home in West Fargo, and it was about $98,000. Now I have one child in Western North Dakota working for North American Mining Company, and he's going to be looking for housing. Will he be able to afford it? He's a diesel mechanic. I love what they do at NDSCS. Butler Caterpillar has such a great program just in terms of training on the job as well as the education. But where is he going to live? Is he going to be able to afford the same house my husband and I did? Our daughter graduates in civil engineering this spring, and thank you, Alteg. She's got a job, loved it. Offered her a job, I think, in September, October, so thank you for that. And with her and her partner, their chances are going to be living down in Wahpeton. And just looking at the housing, whether it's renting or purchasing, it is quite limited. And so we have a steep slope ahead of us in terms of building and creating some of that capacity. And I think there's some really neat opportunities with what the innovation is doing with some of the corporations like Marvin. That is just tremendous. You see some foundations as well, some of those private-public fund partnerships to meet that demand. So I think we do need to be creative. The dollars are out there. But the one thing I would stress is, we think rates have really gone up. A 6% mortgage historically, still pretty good, right? But we got used to what felt like almost free money. I did see one question that came in too, and they said, gosh, the other factor that maybe many of us didn't have was high student loan debt. What is that doing to housing? And certainly that has kept a lot of millennials, and we start looking at other generations, that has pushed out when they've been able to afford that first home. So certainly those rising education costs, we know that education costs have risen much quicker and much higher than inflation, and you are right, it absolutely is keeping some of those Zoomers and millennials and others from being able to afford homes.
Yeah, and John, I was tempted to ask you how the grid system works and if you could explain how it was, but there was an easier question about why the East Coast wants to regulate gas stoves for what ungodly reason. You can throw that one in there, but the real question is kind of, North Dakota and Minnesota seem to be on a little bit of a divergent path. Call it the Red River, call it just a little different politics, but we're going two different ways here. And some of the goals, the bill that was passed down at the Capitol, 100% renewable by 2040, and then looking at, maybe we're not going to buy our the energy we promised in Minnesota from our North Dakota neighbors. How does that work out? I mean, there's got to be a fix, because we can't just say, no, we were going to buy it from you, but we decided not to. That's not how a contract works. And then how do you see those two philosophical views of energy and production? How do you see them coming together? Because we are neighbors just literally across the river.
Yeah, and as you indicated earlier, we are interconnected, and we're part of the same systems. And I think one of the things we have to realize first and foremost, again, I can't speak for the state of Minnesota. I'm one commissioner. I wish I had that one slide that Doug had, throw up there all the disclaimers, but I'm just one commissioner on independent commission. I'm appointed.
But you're up here and you do have a microphone, so
I have
what's
a microphone,
to stop you?
and I have an opinion, and I think it's important to understand that we are a utility. There's a reason we're a utility, and the reason why we regulate in this situation is because we don't produce, okay? We help you all produce, okay? You are the builders, you are the manufacturers, you are the creators of jobs, you are the creators of economic energy. You happen to depend on your utility to do that, and we want to make sure it's done in a fair, stable, and affordable way. That's our first and foremost obligation. And North Dakota may see to do it differently than Minnesota, and I think my commitment as a regulator in this space, and I've got to know the regulators here in North Dakota, they are fine people. I've had a great working relationship with Randy Chrisman on the SPP governing board that I served with him on, and we need to continue that dialogue. We need to work through and talk through this. I think, and if North Dakota sues Minnesota, that's, I guess, a decision they have to make politically, but we have to try to see through that and understand that we need to deliver a service affordably and reliably, and so let's work together. We may have a diverging view. How can we find common ground? And it's about being just transparent, talking with each other. I worry about too often in politics, there's too many prophets out there, hollering and screaming, and not the pragmatics who try to get things done. I always try to fall on that pragmatic end, and so it's my commitment. I think I have a commitment for my other commissioners in Minnesota to open a dialogue with North Dakota to see how we can find common ground, because we made some really great progress on getting our two regional transmission organizations to talk to each other over the last 5 years. They weren't talking to each other, and because of it, they're going to be doing some major development projects here in North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, all the way down to Missouri. And so it's our commitment to open that dialogue. We hope you'll be patient with us as we work through this. They are diverging, but I think, understand, in the end, we all have the same goal. We're a utility to make you successful, and if we can keep our focus on that, I think we can get through this.
So we have just 5 minutes left, and we did get to a couple of questions. I apologize if we didn't hit your question. There's one that's this long on the screen, so whoever wrote that, kudos. Your teacher taught you well. There's no such thing as a bad question. But in the 5 minutes we have left, just a quick, your view of what the economy looks like, the one thing that excites you, that gives you hope, and then the other thing that gives you a little bit of pause, that we've got to address this, workforce being just about the number one thing you hear, up and down. But in the time you have left, what's the one thing you see as a positive? It gives you hope, and then the one challenge. Start with Stacy in the middle.
All right. Well, this maybe doesn't tilt to finance, but I am excited to be in North Dakota. I look at the resiliency we have here. I look at the leadership we have in this room. We are sustainable and resilient. You look at agriculture, you look at energy, you look at our educated workforce, and you look at our engaged population. In the past, they've looked at us as a flyover state, but as you look at what we have in terms of resources, we have so much to be proud of. Yes, there's some fights going on at the legislature right now, and you know what they're fighting over? A surplus, not a deficit. And I can tell you there's a lot of states like California and Illinois who would really like to be in the position we are. So that's something that excites me about where each of us, live, are raising our children, and where we're volunteering. One thing that concerns me is, let's talk about demographics. I mentioned it earlier, we have countries like Japan and Germany and China. We are not replenishing our population. And for many, many years, that was something we thought we're going to have all of this growth, and that's going to put such a burden on our resources. But right now, I believe the number in China is, their birth rate is 1.2 per woman, and to sustain their population, it needs to be 2.1. In the United States, we're around that 1.7. We've had immigration, but I will tell you, demographics, that's a big issue for us because that's going to create the demand, that's going to spark innovation, and that is a concern. So as we think about the millennials being this big population coming up, I do think it is about housing. It is about making sure that we continue to have families. That really is part of our workforce development, oddly enough.
Well, and luckily in North Dakota, the weather provides all that opportunity to be inside together. So
I'm a little worried what that headline might be, so maybe scratch
My
that.
wife's not listening to this, so I'm fine. John, there's energy besides squirrels. Clearly, those terrorists on the farm, we hate them too. But a thing that gives you hope, again, your relationship with North Dakota, that sounds great. But then, what is that one thing that's still hanging out there?
Look, the positive thing I think that I see is we have a lot of great innovators in this space. We are going through a transition, whether we like it or not, or you agree with it. I know North Dakota has concerns because of the energy they sit on about the transition, but I think there is good news. Everybody is always telling us the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine all the time. Duh, we know that, okay? And we're trying to figure out what is the good partner to those inexpensive energy. And North Dakota is seeking solutions to that. They're talking about carbon sequestering, other things that they're doing. We need to be open to those ideas. I heard one of the, and I think one of the wiser kind of activists looking to decarbonize the economy saying we need above, all of the above strategy to figure this out. And so I think North Dakota is doing that. We need to recognize that in Minnesota. We may be doing it a little differently, but I think I'm really excited about those innovators that are out there in our industry. They're actually thinking about how do we solve this problem. And I'm always impressed when I see them. The thing that I concern on, and it goes back to, I hope we just don't just start to get yelling at each other across the Red River. And I hope we can figure out how to work together to make this happen.
Thank you. And Jeff, healthcare, 30 seconds or less, all the things that are happy and positive and the things that scare you in healthcare. No, I'm just kidding. There's positives and there's negatives, the technology improvement, but also the delivery. What is that, bright, shiny object on the horizon? And then what gives you a little pause that we need to have a better focus on?
Yeah, I'll start with what gives me pause, and that's really affordability. Affordability continues to be a really big issue across healthcare, and we've got a lot of cost pressures that are not going to make that easier. The thing that gives me a lot of optimism, two things. One is innovation, and it's not just technology. There's a lot of innovation coming into healthcare. Again, demand is high for healthcare services, so that's bringing in different types of innovators, which in a period of cost pressure, I think, can lead to some interesting innovations. The thing that gives me the greatest optimism, and particularly in this region of the country, is the commitment of the leaders we have in our healthcare economy to do the right thing for their communities. I think we're blessed. I work for a not-for-profit. I think we're blessed in North Dakota and Minnesota to have our largest healthcare organizations, or all of them, but maybe one, be not-for-profits. And I think there is a commitment to the community with those organizations to work with all of you to find those innovative solutions to affordability. So that's what gives me the most optimism.
Fantastic. Well, a great note to end on. Please, everyone, thank John, Stacy, and Jeff for joining us today. We really appreciate your time, guys. And so, as Shannon mentioned at the beginning of the program, these types of events, the discussions, the knowledge you learn here today, being able to be online for a number of chambers all across our region here, they're not possible without support from the Fargo-Moorhead-West Fargo Chamber membership. And it's my pleasure to please help me welcome Josh Herbold from the business banker from Premier Bank, one of our sponsors, to share a few words and to give us a little bit of background as well. Josh, come on up.
At Bremer Bank, we know that opportunity doesn't knock, or leave a message, or send an email. You have to know what it looks like and how to act on it. Our bankers work with you to understand what you want to accomplish and make sure you're ready for every opportunity. Your future looks bright. We'll help you grow into it.
Well, good morning, everyone, and what a great morning we've had thus far in listening to some great speakers. I'm Josh Herbold, Commercial Relationship Manager with Bremer Bank, and we appreciate the opportunity to be one of the premier sponsors today. Bremer is glad to be a community member of the Chamber and has been committed to the economic prosperity and progress of the region since our founding 80 years ago. We have been proud to partner with the people, the farmer, and the businesses, helping to cultivate this thriving community. I know everyone in this room shares in that commitment to the region. Today's summit sheds light on the local economy and where it's heading and gives us a roadmap of how we can all help our region remain competitive. This is challenging and important work, but I'm confident that we can all be successful together. We can also learn a lot from today's incredible keynote speakers. Thank you to the Chamber for organizing this important and impactful event, and to Mr. Feldman, Mr. Duncan, and all the panelists for being part of it. It's now my honor to introduce Ron Feldman.
Congratulations.
Ron is the first Vice President and Chief Operating Officer at the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. He leads the bank's operations, including finance and budgeting, strategic planning, workforce and talent development, and performance against strategic objectives. Mr. Feldman is also a primary advisor on monetary policy, playing a leadership role in preparing for federal open market committee meetings and in the development and communication positions on monetary policy. Please join me in giving Ron a warm welcome.
Well, it's a real pleasure to be here today, and I want to thank the Chamber for having me. And it's such a great turnout, and everyone's been super, super attentive. I know I had to leave a couple of times to go to the bathroom, and this is just a group that's got iron will. I haven't seen anyone else move. I haven't seen anyone else do anything, so I'm impressed. So before I go further, let me just say what the bottom line here is, and I think it's important for anyone in the Fed. I mean, we're unified on this. Inflation is too high, and we're going to do whatever we can do to get it down to where it's supposed to be, which for us is 2%. So let me just give a quick overview of what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk hopefully for 15 minutes. I've got half an hour, and I want to make sure that we've got time for Q&A. A key part of being in the Fed is listening, hearing what's on your mind, and responding to that. So I want to make sure we reserve time for that. So use the QR code, whatever, that'd be great to get the questions to me. And I'm going to talk a little bit about First, what I'll call kind of Fed foundations. So Doug Duncan had a lot of data. I'm not going to give you a lot of data. I think he's already covered it, first of all. And second of all, I think hopefully when you leave here today, you'll have a sense of what we're going to do in the short run. But I want to give you a little sense of how we think about things, at least at the Minneapolis Fed. And hopefully that'll help you think through not just what we're going to do today, but what we're going to do tomorrow. So a little bit of Fed foundations, a couple of just hit high points on the data, talk about what I think are the key questions in front of the Fed, and then some sort of tentative answers to those. Before I go on, there's been a couple of disclaimers. I'm really glad that my disclaimer is super simple, which is I'm speaking on behalf of myself. I'm not speaking for anyone else in the Federal Reserve System. I don't think anyone's going to confuse me with Jay Powell or Lael Brainerd or any of the folks at the Fed, but I'm speaking for myself. So why do you, and by the way, that's a much better disclaimer than Doug's was a whole slide that, there was, somebody made, $1,000 writing that, some law firm, and that's great for them, but we don't have to do that. But why am I giving a disclaimer at all? Because I think sometimes I hear back from people, it's sort of confusing, like you're speaking for yourself, well, but aren't you from the Minneapolis Fed, what does that mean? And it gets to the way that the Fed is set up. So we have 12 reserve banks, there's one in Minneapolis, and then there's the Board of Governors in DC. So that means there are a lot of voices. And the way that monetary policy is made is through the Federal Open Market Committee, right? That's some of the presidents and all of the governors getting together and voting. And so the whole approach of the Fed is sort of wisdom of the crowds, right? It's crowdsourcing. We're going to have a lot of people involved, a lot of people engaged, but we want to be really clear that we're not speaking for each other. We're speaking really sort of as independent voices that come together to try to make the best decision. And this is a really unusual sort of central bank. So we're a central bank where we're located in these regions. So our region in Minneapolis is, and some of you maybe all know this already, but in my experience is it doesn't hurt to remind folks because a lot of this stuff is really sort of foundational and key to what we're doing. So our territory, our region, the 9th District, it goes from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, the western portion of Wisconsin, I'm sort of drawing it with my hand, Minnesota, we got the Dakotas, and Montana. That is the least populated of all the districts, but almost the biggest landmass. People on the East Coast are freaked out when I tell them it's as far from our office in Minneapolis to our branch office in Helena, Montana, as it is from Minneapolis to Washington, D.C. That's something that if you grew up where I did in Maryland, that's sort of not something you grew up understanding. So it's a huge district, and our goal is really to represent the district, to understand what's happening. Of course, we're making policy on a national basis, but we really need to understand what's happening here. So that's the structure, and that's why it's important that we all sort of are clear who we're talking for. Structure. What are we trying to do? Around monetary policy, it's actually relatively straightforward. We've been given a charge by Congress to ensure two things happen. First, that prices are stable, and we've defined what that actually means. That is, inflation should be around 2%. So I'll repeat, we've got one charge, inflation at 2%. We have a second charge, it's called, people will refer to it as full employment. What does that mean? There's actually not a definition of full employment. I think the easiest definition we use is everybody who wants a job can get a job. Not everybody wants a job, not everybody's in the labor force, but if you want a job, the Federal Reserve ought to be operating and shooting that you can get a job. Those are our two things that we're trying to achieve. I'm going to repeat them. I think people know it, but sometimes you can get confused. 2% inflation, full employment. If you had an economics class in high school or college, one thing that people will quickly say is these two things can be in conflict with each other, right? That it could be hard, you might not be able to have full employment if your inflation isn't where you want it to be. And so what do people have in mind when they say that? So what they're thinking about is something like this. There'll be a case where the economy is running really hot, so there's a very tight labor market. That should sound familiar, that's what we're in right now. And what's happening is people, because of the tight labor market, are seeing their wages go up. Firms are increasing their prices to reflect that. Workers, seeing that prices go up, are asking for higher wages. Firms are raising their prices. Workers are asking for more money. That's called a wage price spiral. That's what people are worried about. And if you think about it, that can sort of be in conflict, right? That if you have a really tight labor market and everyone's working, you actually get inflation above 2%. And then you've got to make a decision about how those goals conflict. I guess the one thing I would point out is that's sort of a classic discussion of what happens. Over the last 15 years, we haven't sort of seen that as much as you normally would. If you think about the Great Recession and the financial crisis that led to it, what we actually had was really low inflation. So when you have really low inflation, so inflation below 2%, and you're trying to get it to 2%, that's going to happen at the same time that we actually want employment to go up. So we want to raise inflation and raise the number of people that are working. So that's a case where these things aren't in conflict. In fact, they're moving in the same direction. And if anything, the criticism of the Fed, which I think we've taken on board and agreed with to some extent, is that we didn't do enough. We weren't aggressive enough in trying to get inflation up and putting more people to work. If you look at the situation we're in now, you would think, and we obviously saw inflation going up, as I mentioned, it's too high, but as inflation is starting to go down, we're looking at the labor market, and people will point to the jobs report that we just got at the tail of last week. We're seeing inflation starting to go down, but we're seeing the labor market still be really, really tight. So this idea that these things are always in conflict is something that hasn't really been the case for the last several, 10 years. So again, we've got this dual mandate. We've got this idea that we're going to work together collectively, have a lot of voices. I think the other thing that's really critical is how do we go about trying to achieve the mandate? Well, we really have three tools. We have interest rates. I think people are really focused on that. We've got our balance sheet. Doug Duncan showed that our balance sheet, we bought a lot of assets, mortgage-backed securities and treasuries as we were trying to provide expansionary monetary policy. We were trying to increase the amount of activity in the economy. We bought a lot of assets. We're letting those things sort of dwindle off of our balance sheet. The third thing that we have that a lot of people don't talk as much about because it's a little more subtle is we have what we call forward guidance. So what is forward guidance? Forward guidance is trying to tell people what are we going to do? If something happens, what will we do? And why does that matter? That might be the most powerful tool we actually have. It matters because this is a Chamber of Commerce event, so we've got tons of firms that are here. You don't just care about what interest rates are going to be tomorrow. You don't care about today's interest rate. You want to know the path of interest rates. You want to know what interest rates are going to look like in the future. And since the Fed obviously has a role in setting interest rates, it's key for us to articulate what do we think that path is going to look like. And as I said again, the path that we worry about is a path where workers are demanding higher salaries, firms are raising prices, inflation is rising, people think inflation is going to rise in the future, and so that behavior sort of creates this circle where you get embedded inflation. That was the sort of stagflation period we had where Paul Volcker had to raise rates. And if you want to understand why we're so focused on inflation now, given where it was at, it's precisely to avoid that kind of spiral. It's precisely to make sure we don't get in a position where there's self-fulfilling prophecies. And sometimes you'll hear Fed folks talk about not what is today's inflation, but they'll look at financial markets, they'll look at surveys, and they'll say, what do people think future inflation is going to be? So that's expectations of inflation. And we're very focused on making sure those expectations don't leave 2%. Those have to be, quote unquote, anchored. Again, what are we trying to achieve? We want to make sure inflation's at 2%. And if people think future inflation's not going to be at 2%, then we're going to find ourselves potentially in this sort of spiral where inflation starts rising. A quick side note here, the reason why expectations are so important to keep them at 2% is that means sometimes the Fed doesn't have to act, right? Because if people think we're going to act, then they won't look into the future and see inflation, and they won't incorporate that into their behavior today. But because inflation was high, we really needed to act aggressively to get it down, precisely to avoid this sort of spiral. So again, just to repeat, we've got a lot of voices. That's how the Fed makes policy. We think that is worked really well. We've got this dual mandate that we're focused on, and we've got these three tools: interest rates, balance sheet, and expectations. So let me talk really briefly about some of the data that's come in, and then ask a sort of rhetorical couple questions, and then hopefully people are asking questions that you are thinking about, and I'll get to those. So where does the economy stand today? So it stands with unemployment being quite low. So in the Dakotas, in North Dakota, it's at, it's 2.3%. That is a really low unemployment rate. I was just talking to someone the other day. Minnesota actually had recorded, these are monthly rates, Minnesota had the lowest monthly unemployment rate. This was at the beginning, at tail end of last year, the lowest state unemployment rate ever recorded. So not the lowest unemployment rate ever recorded in Minnesota, the lowest state unemployment rate ever recorded. And it's not much lower than what we're seeing in North Dakota now. So I think that's just reflective of the conversation that folks are having, that getting labor is the most challenging, biggest challenge in front of firms. So that's one measure of the labor market. There's another measure of the labor market that's not quite as consistent with the labor market being so tight. So there's different ways of measuring this. So the unemployment rate is a really straightforward thing. You go and you ask people, are you looking for a job? If they say yes, they're unemployed. If they say no, they're not in the labor force, right? They're not looking for a job. So they're either working, looking, or not in the labor force. There's another measure a lot of other measures you can look at, but one would be, let's just take a look at the number of people that are employed and divide it by the population. So employment divided by the population, it's got the acronym EPOP, Employment to Population Ratio. If you look at that ratio, so right now that's sitting at 60, and if you look at pre-COVID, that was right around 61, right? So these are huge numbers you're looking at. So what that means is there are millions of people who previously were working in the labor force that aren't anymore. That's not going to be captured by the unemployment rate. So on the one hand, we've got really tight markets, but that the unemployment rate's showing us. On the other hand, we think that there are workers that are still on the sidelines that aren't coming in. And I think one of the things Doug said that I would want to resonate or sort of double down on is this is an economy that's really challenging to understand. Why have those folks not come in? Are they retiring early? Are they worried about COVID? Are they living on the sort of government support that they had and don't want to come in now? Are they reevaluating their life and decide they want to do something different? Some of these can be answered empirically, but not all of them. But the bottom line is, so unemployment tight, looks like there's still some slack that could come in. Inflation, again, is where we're focused on. We look at something that's called the PCE. It's one measure of, CPI is one measure of inflation, PCE is another one. We look at that one. That peaked in June. This is year over year at 7%. Right now, it's at 5%. The bottom line is if you want to be at 2%, that's a number that's going to be too high. So what's been the response of policy? Policy being, what did we do with interest rates? Well, we've been raising them. I won't go through every single raise, but the total was 4 and 25 points, so 425 basis points of increase in 22. Obviously, another 25 that happened recently. That's a really rapid rate of increase, and it gets to what I said before. Inflation was too high. We have to make sure that expectations stayed anchored, and the way to do that is to raise rates. So what are the questions that are in front of us, at least that as I see, that we get asked the most? Are you going to keep raising interest rates? That's the question, if you go to the men's room, you're sitting next to someone I know from your Fed, they're going to say, are you going to raise interest rates? That's the question that people will ask. So there's two ways of answering that, neither of which are going to be my answer. So there is every quarter, there's a survey that's done of the people that are the leaders in the Federal Reserve System, the heads of the reserve banks and the governors in DC, and they actually ask them for what their projections are. It's a little bit more complicated than that, and the details don't matter as much, but the key part is they ask them those questions, and they say to them, where do you think interest rates are going to be? And by interest rates, I mean the short-term interest rate that the Federal Reserve controls, which is called the federal funds rate. The last survey, which was done at the end of the last year, the median, the middle estimate was 5.1%. So I'll repeat, 5.1%. So that's the current target rate the committee has set is 4.5 to 4.75. So that would give you one sense of where rates are going to go, if they're going to go up or not. Another way to answer that question is just to look at the statement that gets released. After every FOMC meeting, they release a statement. And in the statement, we try to give this quote unquote forward guidance. I'm just going to read the sentence that's really relevant here. So it says, the committee anticipates that ongoing increases in the target range will be appropriate in order to attain a stance of monetary policy that is sufficiently restrictive to return inflation to 2%. So in the statement itself, we said we're going to do more increases. After every of the FOMC meetings, the chairman gives a press conference. You can go on our website and look at the transcript. Let me just repeat some of the things he said in the first 2 pages of the transcript. So you don't have to read the whole thing. If you just want to read the first couple pages, that'll tell you where it's going. We have more work to do. Although inflation has moderated recently, it remains too high, et cetera, et cetera. So we're telling people that we're going to do more. How much more? It's going to be dependent on what we see. There is no algorithm here. There's nothing. There's no chat bot that we put in. How much should we do? And then it comes back and says 3 increases of 25. We're going to look at the data and we're going to see, is it consistent with getting inflation down to 2% and full employment? The second question is, okay, well, you seem like you're raising rates a lot. Are we going to have a recession? And again, let's go back to the survey. They actually ask folks, what are the leaders of the reserve banks and the board of governors, they asked them, where do you see GDP going? So the median there, as of December, was GDP for this year coming in at 0.5 percentage point. So Doug showed that they have a slight recession. They had it like sort of negative, right around negative 50, 0.5 percentage point. The median has it at 50. Neil Kashkari, who's the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, who I work for, he's disclosed what his answers were to the survey. He has it at 0. So, I think that tells you that people aren't expecting a lot of growth. Some folks, technically aren't saying it's a recession, but I think the bottom line is sort of people are expecting that we're going to have to get some reduction in growth, and that's going to be consistent with inflation getting back to 2%. So I'm going to stop, see what the questions are. Let me just do a quick summary. In my mind, this is a really, really complicated, challenging time. But at the end of the day, there's some simple things we need to do. We need to get inflation back to 2%. We're going to do that. We need to make sure that expectations of what the future looks like is consistent with 2% inflation. And we need to make sure that we're also looking at the other side of our mandate, which is getting as many people employed as want to be. So let me take a look at the questions that are here. Okay, Mr. Feldman, first of all, I appreciate that, whoever said that. That's the kind of respect I don't get at home or at work. Do you have any commentary on the economic case for stable and affordable child care? Child care is a really, really, really tough nut to crack. And I don't mean in a political sense. Why is it so hard? Because there's typically in the conversations I see, there's lots of discussion about we need to get wages up in childcare to draw more people in, to make sure that the firms providing childcare, have a return that justifies them staying in the business. Unlike maybe a lot of businesses, the people that are buying your service have their own income, and they're making a decision about whether they're going to come back to work or not. They're going to be in the labor force, and they can't pay you more than what they're earning. So in some sense, there's a sort of natural cap that's put on how much that the customers of the child care center or the home daycare or whatever it is, there's a real cap that's put on it, because if it goes too high, obviously every business can't charge whatever it wants, but this is like a very specific problem where the wages in that industry, in some sense, almost have to be a little bit below the wages of the people that are using it, otherwise they won't use it to begin with. And so if you want to sort of get around that nut, some other source of funds has to come in there. If you think that the only way you're going to draw people into that industry is to pay them more than what the customers are using. Those kind of funds have to come from someplace. So that's just sort of background. All that means to me is that this is a really, really tough problem to solve. It's not going to be something that's solved simply. So I think the question was really getting at, well, isn't this an important thing to solve? I think we hear from firms all the time it's a huge problem that they need to solve. So I don't think it's the Federal Reserve stepping in and sort of, no one needs the Federal Reserve to step in and say this is a problem that needs to solve. I think businesses are really clear it's a problem that needs to be solved. So why does our government rely solely on monetary policy or raising interest rates to control spending? Why doesn't it instead rely on fiscal policy by reducing spending or addressing supply chain problems? So that's a great question. Let me rephrase that. There are lots of things that are out there. The Federal Reserve is not the only thing that's out there. We're not responsible for fiscal policy. We're not responsible for regulatory policy. I think the way I would think about it is we take all those things as givens. So if the government is going to spend more money on something, we incorporate that into our forecast of what we need to do. If governments decide that they're going to loosen regulatory policy or tighten regulatory policy, we factor that into what we do. You know, we've got a really specific set of things we've been charged with doing that are really hard. We don't take on other people's responsibilities, but obviously we monitor those really closely because they affect what we're going to do. The Fed is no longer issuing remittances to the Treasury and is essentially operating at a loss. Is that a concern? So let me, that's a great question, and let me try to explain a little bit about what that is, because I don't want to assume everyone knows. I also want to be cognizant of time. I was told 11 o'clock, or else I get in trouble. So I'll try to be quick here. So the Federal Reserve, because we have this big portfolio of assets that we own, we get income from those assets. And that income comes to us, and if it's more than what our expenditures are, we send that money back to the US Treasury, and it's just part of the federal government's basic fundraising. What's happening now is as we're basically paying more out to it's a little bit complicated, but basically banks have deposits with us. We are paying more money out to them than we're earning. We're actually losing money. So in an accounting sense, the Federal Reserve is losing money. Should you worry? No. Why? Because the central bank basically funds itself, right? We create money. So this is an accounting entry. It doesn't change how we do policy. I don't want to sound glib about it. It's not that we're sort of unaware of it or that we're not trying to be prudent with taxpayer monies and given the operations we have, et cetera. But we're not like a regular corporation, and it doesn't mean the same thing to us or to you. And people should have tremendous confidence in our ability to do the work we need to do, regardless of the income statement. And I think there's time for one more question. I think that's, I think one of these that I'm reading now, I think is called a comment in the form of a question. So I'm not sure I'm going to actually try to answer it. Higher interest rates impact ability to create new housing. How does this stave of inflation while avoiding unintended consequences? So I think we shouldn't sort of try to be too cute at the Fed about what we're doing when we raise interest rates. Why does raising interest rates, why are people worried about that trade-off with employment? Because we know that interest rates, when they get higher, means that housing is more expensive, it's more expensive for firms to borrow, and in return, that means there's going to be less construction of housing, there's going to be less borrowing by firms, so a machine that a firm would have bought to expand a line, they're not going to do that with higher interest rates. We're aware of that, and for sure that's a cost. The question is, given what our mandate is, which is to bring inflation back to 2%, is that justified by what we need to do? So I appreciate everybody listening. I really appreciate it. I'm going to stay here, so if folks have things they want me to know about Fargo or North Dakota economy or Minnesota, I'd love to hear it. It's your input that hopefully makes us more effective. So thanks for your time.
All right. How was the program? Good? Awesome. thank you so much for being here. We really do appreciate it. I always judge the room by the fact that we haven't lost a whole lot of people, so it must have meant the content was pretty good. So again, thank you to our keynote speakers, Doug and Ron, our panelists that joined us today. This is the type of information and the type of expertise that we have here in the Midwest, and it's a reason why we're doing as well as we are. As I was gonna, short on time, so I won't give you my whole wrap-up and synopsis of today, but I will say, the number one thing we heard over and over and over again is workforce. And so there is no doubt, I heard from many of you, even some of our panelists talking about engagement with our future workforce and our current workforce. I cannot stress enough the fact that you have a tremendous asset and resource at your fingertips. Ignite FMWF, if you have not been there, if you haven't realized, the Chamber received a $9.6 million grant from the Economic Development Administration to tackle some of the workforce issues and challenges in 3 major areas: precision agriculture, advanced manufacturing, and cyber IT. But in addition to that, what we're finding is tools like this that we've developed for all of you are at your fingertips and need to be used. Ignite FMWF is being used by all of our school districts right now as a direct opportunity for you as business leaders to connect one-on-one with your future workforce and with students. We have almost 400 businesses that are on the technology platform using it. How are they using it? You create a profile. It talks about your business. We just filmed about 60 videos here on individual career cards. So these are individuals that are in high demand jobs talking about their journey. Those career cards are attached to open jobs. So we have over almost 11,000 open jobs that are listed on the site. We have almost 1,000 active job seekers that are looking at some type of transitionary, we'll use that word, approach to where they're going. But every one of you as business professionals should have your own business profile on Ignite. It's super simple. You put in some of the attributes and qualifications that you have, and then that becomes searchable for our teachers, for our faculty, but also for almost 30 nonprofits that are working with populations like Justice Involved, our new American immigrant populations, our veterans, high school students, BIPOC. Those are the types of populations that are looking for opportunities within your companies. I can't tell you enough that if we have all of you creating profiles and integrating and communicating with our current job seekers, but also our future students, we have a much stronger opportunity to retain those students here in our community. So that is my what do I want to say, our plug to have you involved in the work that we're doing. We also have another shoot of videos, May 8th through the 12th. If you are a company that has employees that you want to highlight in high demand jobs that we have here in this region, we want to come out and film those videos at your company. There's no cost to you to do this, but it gives you a great amount of traction. So if you have any interest of that, in the back of the room, you'll see them waving their hands as I call them out. Curtis is in the back, Jenna is in the back, Matt is here. We have an entire team, so reach out to us. We are very serious about working with you to help us at least ease the workforce. We're certainly not going to solve it all, but we'll be your partners in helping to ease that. Again, thank you to our sponsors. Thank you to our chambers that joined us today. We so appreciate all of you being here in person. This is what is kind of the lifeblood of the chamber. We look forward to seeing you at our next event. Have a great day.